How are you feeling? How long have you been here?
3 months, May 17th.
And what brought you?
That's difficult to answer.
To give you some idea.
I am not completely like other people.
What do you mean by that?
People dislike me because I am not completely like them. I am trying to do with my life something which few people try to do, and this influences my thinking and consequently my action.
What is it you're trying to do with your life?
Play the piano for people.
I'm not clear. How is it that playing the piano for people has eventually resulted in your being here in the hospital?
That's difficult to answer.
the end? There's a noise inside my head of crying people facing death. Is this the end? Is this the end? Oh, I'm burning in the stone. There's no place to hide. I'm burning in the stone. What have we done to the world? What have we done to the world? I'm burning in the stone. There's no place to hide. I'm burning in the stone. This is the final
Hey, Carlin, Miss Boryshenko, you're picking on my boy James. See this little fishy, this little dolphin gummy? You're picking on my boy James. You're talking about goats. You're talking about Israel. Saying big, meanie head stuff. But you don't understand that when we open it up and reveal the interior, we see the truth. And the truth is, you're a silly goose. A real silly goose. I'm not gonna eat it on camera. Because y'all freaking perverts. You never know what people like you gonna do. Take the film, take the footage I've supplied, twist it around, turn it into something that it's not. Hey, my little toesies. My little toesies. This is what a James Lindsay fan looks like. And yes, I'm a Carlin Boryshenko hater.
He's calling out cults and conspiracies wild, Gnostic sex cults and theories compiled. But one question's raised and it's block on the spot. No room for dissent in the world he's got. But the crowd starts to laugh and they're starting to see a whole lot of words that just don't agree. Oh, Emperor James, are you feeling the breeze? Might wanna look down, see what's caught at the knee. He's the Emperor with no clothes, strutting around like nobody knows, shouting loud, thinking he's wise, but he's bearing it all to everyone's eyes. He's the Emperor, yeah, with no disguise, slipped down by his own price. The fat is an intellectual line. Oprah's got mind control, powers divine. He's calling Saint Michael the devil in charge, and telling the Catholics they got it too large. Oh James, don't you know it's a tricky game when you're calling out folks but you're doing the same. You say it's a truth only you understand, but the crowd's got a mirror showing just where you stand. He's the emperor with no clothes, strutting around like nobody knows, shouting loud, thinking he's wise, but he's burying it all to everyone's eyes. He's the emperor, yeah, with no disguise, stripped down by his own pride. Start to fade and the truth comes around. His theories unravel like threads on the ground. The court starts to giggle, the people all cheer, for the emperor's naked, the truth's finally here. He's the emperor with no clothes, strutting around like nobody knows, shouting loud, thinking he's wise, but he's burying it all to everyone's eyes. He's the emperor, yeah, with no disguise, stripped down by his own pride. So here's to the lesson, let's give it a toast to emperors walking in nothing but boast. Join Carlin's cult and open your eyes. She's here to expose James's epic lies.
What up, everyone? Happy Wednesday. Welcome to The Cult. The Cult is a little show that I stream Monday through Friday at 5 p.m. Eastern Time on this here YouTube channel, on Rumble, on X, the platform formerly known as Twitter, where we usually do deep dives into the far left and really talk about whatever I feel like talking about in regards to the culture war, the cult of the woke far left, the cult of the right sometimes. Sometimes we just talk about me running a cult, apparently. Apparently people think this is a real cult. Just so everyone knows, they can leave at any time. If you think that you're in a cult because you're watching me, it's just a name of a show. You can leave at any time. And I gotta tell you, like, today I actually found some videos that I'm really excited to watch, and I'm gonna give you a little preview of what those videos are. And it's on a YouTube channel I've never heard of before, only like less than 200 subscribers. And I'm really glad I found it because this guy has made a whole little mini documentary series about the fall of the International Socialist Organization. Now, I've heard about the fall of the International Socialist Organization. The International Socialist Organization was the precursor to Haymarket Books. So Haymarket Books is basically built off of the infrastructure for the ISO. Haymarket Books is the largest socialist book publisher in the country. They are the proprietors of the Socialism Conference that happens every year that I went undercover at in 2023, that we watched from afar in 2024 because I didn't want to get beat up by Antifa, but who knows what might happen this year. Anyway, Haymarket Books is a really large socialist book publisher. They do a lot of live streams online. We've been introduced to a lot of our favorite socialists through Haymarket Books. And the reason that Haymarket Books exists is because the International Socialist Organization that preceded it had some sort of Me Too sex scandal that basically resulted in the dissolving of the organization. And I've always wondered more about this from kind of the socialist perspective, like what actually happened with the ISO, because I've heard about it here or there, but I've never actually seen significant material on it. We did find a presentation from the Denver Communists several months ago where the Denver Communists were talking about the sex scandal that downfalled the ISO, and that was about a 20-minute presentation. But this guy has put together a whole, apparently 5-part series, because one of the parts is missing for some reason, and I guess we'll find out why. But he's put together a whole series that it looks to me like he actually has like real footage from like events and stuff like that. And so this to me looks like it's actually going to be like a legit kind of documentary about it. And so this is a little bit of a wonky kind of like modern contemporary socialist history sort of thing. I mean, I think that this all happened, I'm not sure exactly what year this happened exactly. I'm sure we'll find out. But I think this has all happened relatively like in the last 15, 20 years or something like that. So it is actually relatively recent. And I want to watch it. And that's what we're going to do today. We're going to watch this documentary. It's going to be a watch party. It's going to be a documentary watch party. Alex, thank you for being a member of the channel for 11 months. That James Lindsay fan video had me laughing out loud. I mean, I didn't make that video. James is accusing me of making that video. James is telling people that apparently I staged a false flag in terms of that video, but that didn't, I promise you, that did not come from me. That video, quite frankly, freaks me out. But it is representative of what we're dealing with now with James Lindsay. And speaking of James, we simply cannot proceed with today's episode before we just do a glimpse into James Lindsay's current timeline. We have to have a segment called The Unhinged Meltdown of James or something like that, because James and James's friends have been tweeting about me all fucking day. And I'm like, bro, I slept in today. I had a late night last night working. I slept in today. I got up. I was working on an article about Trump basically getting rid of affirmative action. That's going to be going up on the Substack. There's this interesting information about how, all this data about critical race theory still being taught in schools that came out today via Corey DeAngelis. I was going to write an article about that. I had to get the new episode of the Counter-Revolutionary Book Club up online. I was working. And while I was working, James was tweeting. And and he's been tweeting some crazy things. Like James is like you thought James is off the deep end before. No, I think James is officially broken. And so what I want to do is literally, let's just scroll down his timeline, because I started pulling up kind of clips, like not clips. I started pulling up individual posts that James had sent about me earlier. And then I realized that James has tweeted about me so much today. It's actually just easier for us if we scroll down his timeline. So we have to take a look into Unhinged James Absurdia. And then we're going to go and watch our International Socialist Organization documentary. And I think that's going to be really great. Now, listen, I do want to say this. Oh, that's not the one I wanted to bring up. This one. I do want to say this. Since James is convincing people, apparently, that I run an actual cult, I think that it's in my best interest to start issuing directives about how I want my cult run. Just in case, on the off chance that people actually listen to what I'm saying. So I do want to make this very, very clear. I don't mind if people have fun at James Lindsay's expense. I don't mind if you guys criticize James Lindsay's ideas, if you criticize him for having an unhinged meltdown about me, if you criticize the content of what he's doing. I don't mind that at all. I just want to make really flipping sure that we maintain the intellectual and the ethical high ground here, because when you guys are dicking around on the internet, that inevitably comes back to bite me. And I just want to make sure we're all on the same page that even though I am absolutely going to still continue to debunk James Lindsay's work, because I'm sorry, he's lying to millions of people about what the left is. And so if he's going to continue to lie to millions of people about what the far left is, which is quite frankly my fucking wheelhouse, I'm going to debunk him and I'm going to criticize him. And James Lindsay comes out of academia, and the fact that James believes that his work is above criticism and is above like intellectual grievance, that's absurd. Okay, that's just absurd. So James can suck an egg. I am absolutely going to still criticize his work intellectually because he's causing problems about an issue that I care about, and he can't shut me up just by behaving like an unhinged moron on the internet. But I really do want to make sure that we're maintaining the intellectual high ground. James right now is trying to make it seem like I'm the one doing all the shady shit, but I think it's pretty clear that it's actually James that is crashing out, and that I actually haven't done anything wrong. I might have done things that James didn't like, but I haven't done anything wrong. And we're going to see that in the course of this. So I just want to make sure that my wishes are understood and are clear, that I do not want my community representing me in an unhinged way like James's community represents him. So that video that we saw at the beginning with the James Lindsay fan and the Karlin Borisenko hater, don't do that, okay? Don't do that. It makes you look weird. It makes me look psychotic. And, we don't, I'm already kind of crazy and artistic and, a little, out of the ordinary anyway. We don't need to give them any more ammo unnecessarily. Criticize the work. Criticize the statements. Do it calmly. Do it directly. Even use a little bit of humor or satire or things like that. Make fun of it, right? Like what we're doing right here. Like, spoiler alert, I don't really run a cult. I know people are shocked at this revelation that the cult thing is not real, but we can play with it and we can make satire out of it. And that's the purpose of all of this. Yeah, well, I agree with this too. James has already lost, and now he's kicking and screaming and flailing, but we still have to maintain that high road because, listen, I want James refugees coming over here. No, you can still do the go pic. You can still do that. Memeing is allowed, okay? Memeing is absolutely allowed, and our memes are better than James's memes. So I just want to make sure my wishes are clear on that. Now let's just take a scroll down James's timeline, and we're literally just going to go from the top. And I'm just going to reload it just to make sure we have fresh images. And let's see how much James has tweeted about me in the last day or so. Let's see. Oh, he's retweeting Carrie. That'll probably have something to do with me, but we're going to go. Oh, look, retweeting Poetry Painter. Retweeting Poetry Painter. Okay. The third one looks like a threat. What did I say? I said James Lindsay is so desperate to get me deplatformed, he's starting to smear people in my audience and calling everyone brainwashed. That's true. We'll show you the tweets about that. James, darling, I've never had more or stronger supporters than I have now. True. Your constant hissy fits are just going to make it hurt more. They're saying I'm literally threatening James. Well, I'm intellectually threatening him, that's for sure. James is retweeting that. Let's see. Continuing to scroll. Oh, this is about me. Okay, check this out. James, apparently someone made a video of that's going to be Poetry Painter as well. This is going to be a video, I haven't even looked at this yet, of all the tweets that I've sent about James, allegedly. My psycho stalker routinely claims I'm obsessed with her when in fact it is obviously the other way around. Okay, yeah. I pay her no attention. Yeah, James, this is definitely you paying me no attention. Yep, yeah, absolutely. And see nothing she says or does except when concerned friends send it to me. This video shows the depth of her obsession. And then Brick Suit, who is a person I've never actually spoken to, but Brick Suit got famous for wearing a suit to every Trump rally. So, I mean, not exactly like an intellectual powerhouse, but he made a whole meme of me that says I'm crazy. And so, fine. I don't really care about that. I think it's pretty crazy to wear the same suit to every single Trump rally. So we all have standards. But then James, check this out. This is actually a win for me. This is actually a win. because this is a meme that James made. You can see it right here. This is a meme that James made where he's saying everyone that is not a liberal has a cluster B personality disorder. Like in James's world, you have two options. You can either be a liberal or you can have cluster B personality disorder. That's what this is saying. You are liberal and you are sane, or you are not liberal and you have cluster B personality disorder. Okay. Well, James then photoshopped my face onto it, and I gotta say, that's like a pretty good picture of me, and I don't mind at all that James is like literally telling people I'm the direct opposite of a liberal, because I still get called a liberal all the time, honestly. Like, people come into my feed, they call me a liberal all the time, and I think this is actually a pretty good indication that, like, I'm not. And so, yeah, like, W me, okay, fine. He also retweeted that directly. Again, they're using good pictures of me, so I can't complain. They're not photoshopping pictures to make me look fat anymore, so that's something, I guess, that is a W for me. Let's see. We're continuing to scroll on James's timeline. Continuing to scroll. Oh, there he is again, retweeting Poetry Painter. There he is. Okay. Uh-huh. Oh, Frank is tweeting about me. What did Frank say? Karlin Borisenko doxed. Loved Bob. Oh, now the accusations are going up. Oh, now I doxed James Lindsay's stepdaughter? Oh, did I? Oh, did I? Wow. This is just blatant falsehood. Everyone knows that, right? James Lindsay's stepdaughter was posting publicly that she was James Lindsay's stepdaughter before I ever even spoke to her. Karlin has now doxed and love-bombed and groomed James Lindsay's at-risk daughter. You know what? It's like, I mean, this is not this is actual defamation, but I don't actually care enough to sue them because I think they look insane. Like, maybe I will at some point, but okay, here's the deal. James Lindsay, and I've covered this a million times, so I'm not going to go in depth over it. James Lindsay's stepdaughter is a 28-year-old fully grown adult that lives on her own, that is completely well-adjusted, who I've had a couple of conversations with over DMs, and James is so pissed off that he's now having his attack dogs say that I doxed her when I didn't, that I love-bombed her when I didn't, and they don't know what the content of our conversation is, by the way, that I groomed her when, P.S., you can't groom a 28-year-old. Like, sorry, James, you can't groom a 28-year-old. And then she's saying, and they're saying that I told her to share private family texts, which literally didn't happen, which Karlin then publicly shared. Well, I retweeted what she publicly shared herself. This affects all of us that try to keep our families safe from predatory groomers like Karlin. Again, I want to remind people that James Lindsay is so worried about me talking to his 28-year-old adult stepdaughter that he refuses to pick up the phone and call her. She is like desperate to talk to him. Well, maybe not so much anymore, because she's out there, and you can see this on her timeline. Maybe we'll see it come up in James's feed. She's out there responding to these tweets saying, "Stop saying this shit, you morons." That's literally what James Lindsay's stepdaughter is saying right now. She's responding to all these people, and she's incredibly pissed off. And I have nothing to do with this. This is not me doing this. They are insulting James Lindsay's stepdaughter's intelligence every single time they say she's being groomed. They're saying things that happened that didn't happen. And she's quite frankly pissed about it. And every single time that one of James's friends posts about this, she gets more pissed off, and it just throws more lighter fluid on any potential they have to actually have a reconciliation. And that has nothing to do with me. Has nothing to do with me at all. And and I almost think it's an inevitability at this point, when I eventually release the direct messages that I've had with James Lindsay's stepdaughter, And these people better pray that I don't sue them for defamation, because I actually know what happened in the DMs and nothing happened. There's nothing in there. They're not going to see me fishing for information. They're not going to see me love bombing her. They're not going to see me grooming her. They're not going to see me asking for private information or text messages or anything. That doesn't exist in the entire messaging history. This is absurdity on a whole new level. Today she released an audio message about her talking about her account. It couldn't be clearer. Yeah, I mean, so now James is not only ignoring the wishes of his stepdaughter, he's enticing his friends to do things the stepdaughter doesn't want in order to attack me. I don't know, James. Keep acting like a maniac, I guess. People are saying she should really have her account suspended. This is unsafe for everyone. Has she been reported? What am I having my account suspended for exactly? Talking to a 28-year-old adult who, by the way, is most of the time sending me the DMs. Which I don't mind. I'll talk to the girl. I honestly and truly actually feel really bad for her at this point, because this is just, it's actually really sad and disgusting, if we're honest about it. James and his friends are behaving in a sad and disgusting way towards his stepdaughter, and I, as someone who doesn't have the best relationship with my father, I feel that on like a personal level, and it just sucks. So will I answer his stepdaughter if she sends me a DM? Yeah, I will. Sorry, not gonna say otherwise just to appease James's bullshit. It's not cool, man. It's not cool. Yeah, James is the one that should be picking up the phone and calling her. But he refuses. He refuses. Let's keep scrolling down his timeline. This is them trying to paint a narrative that I'm trying to manipulate someone's family. All sorts of people are retweeting this thing. Listen, this is like the guy from the Babylon Bee that's talking about this. Oh, he's not doing it there, but he is talking about it. Let's see if James retweets. James is retweeting everyone that's retweeting Frank. They're all trying to get my account banned. He's got Reagan in here too. I'm equally disgusted with James Lindsay's behavior. It's no way to treat your stepdaughter. He's become addicted to fame and money and clout and blocked his 28-year-old stepdaughter. Yeah, James is the one that blocked his own stepdaughter. We didn't do shit. Look at this. James is retweeting everyone that's posting this. Retweeting everyone that's posting this, getting all his friends in on it. This is basically torching any relationship that he's ever going to have with his stepdaughter moving forward. I promise you. Let's see. Where does Joel Berry's tweet? Hang on. He's still talking about that, but let me go back to Frank's thing. Actually, let me go back to Joel Berry real quick. Not him right here. Okay, let me show you this. Let me show you this. So Joel Berry retweeted this earlier and said I was satanic. There is all James's friends. This is James Lindsay's stepdaughter. This is James Lindsay's stepdaughter replying to Reagan, who's replying to Joel Berry saying, oh my God, not him saying I was groomed into sharing these when Carlin didn't even know I was going to. That's in reference to the text messages, because how could I possibly be someone with a brain who makes their own decisions? They hate Carlin so much they think a 28-year-old can't think for herself. There's an audio message there that she did. Let's listen to what she said. I actually haven't listened to this audio message yet. I have no idea what this says. I haven't listened to it. I was doing other stuff. Let's hear from James Lindsay's stepdaughter directly.
Okay, I'm making this for anyone who doesn't understand why my username is on this account now. So basically my old account, I privated it, changed the username. So then Britta Bongwater was just out there in the universe. So I used my other Twitter account that I made in November. It's just one I've never done anything with. To reclaim that, because I want to keep that username. It's important to me, as like dumb as that sounds. And I figured I would talk on here since nothing can be traced back to anything. Like, you can't go through, like how with my old Twitter, you could go back and just find whatever to try to rip me apart. There's just nothing on here. So it just felt like this is a safer way to, say what I want to say. So that's really it. It's not any kind of like anything crazy. I just had another account and I took the username back. So if you type in Brita Bongwater and you find my private account, it's under a different username. I don't know why it's doing that. But they're two separate accounts. Also, to anyone who's saying that I stopped talking to my stepdad over politics, no, I didn't.
James
I would
said
never
that.
stop talking to family over politics. That's not who I am.
By the way, James said that. James tweeted that like last week or something.
If I did that, I would not talk to like most of my family. So the stuff between him and I has nothing to do with politics. I know that's probably like hard to grasp since this is you guys are on the political side of Twitter, but that's not really what's going on. So if you guys have any further questions, I can answer them on voice recording if you all want.
See, so that's a very nice offer. If you guys have questions, ask her directly. Let's just go into her account. Let's see what else she's posted. God, it just sucks that it sucks so bad that James is doing this to her. It sucks so bad. Let's see. She's replying to me there. So this is basically her just fighting with people, essentially. Like, she was arguing with all the same people that like have been attacking me forever last night, and I felt so bad for her. I was like, well, I'm not going to tell her what to do or anything, but man. So let's go back to James's timeline. I mean, I think that she just wants him to cut the shit. I think that James's stepdaughter literally just wants all of them to stop posting about her. That's all that she wants. If they stop, she's going to stop. But the thing is, they don't know how to stop. So James is carrying this on. James's friends are carrying this on. I've already moved on to something else. Like, we've already hashed over the fact that James Lindsay's stepdaughter revealed that James was in an open marriage that he forced his wife to be in, that she didn't want to be in because James wanted to go around and bang all his groupies. She revealed that on the internet before I ever even knew who she was. She said what she has to say. She wants to talk to James privately. She said she wants to talk to James privately. James should pick up the fucking phone and call her. Yep, they've got nothing else to come at me for. That's exactly right. Let's keep scrolling down James's timeline. I want to see what else he said. Just retweeting Frank all day. Da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da. Da-da-da-da-da. Yup, James is sicking the psycho attack dogs who lied about me against his own daughter. Yes, he is. Stepfather of the year. Tell you what, stepfather of the year. James is now painting himself as being a victim of the woke right. Yeah, sure, James. Oh, they're asking if I'm... Oh, so I tweeted last night. So this again is James Lindsay's stepdaughter. James Lindsay's stepdaughter said, I didn't ask her to defend me. I asked her to share information. I don't need anyone to defend me, which is why I'm defending myself. She made the post about me sharing secrets to get in my stepdad's head. It was a lie. I haven't shared anything. And that's actually true. I did just say that just to fuck with James's head. So I retweeted her last night and I said, fact check true. James Lindsay's stepdaughter hasn't told me anything she hadn't already posted publicly, nor have I asked her for anything. I literally just did it to fuck with James. Had he reached out and talked to her privately, he would have already known this. And now James should put on his big boy pants and stop fucking around because she doesn't deserve to be treated like he's treating her. James responds, not only that, she manipulated the relationship she made specifically to spread lies about it to mess with my head and did so in the name of protecting my stepdaughter. This is absolutely unacceptable. What the fuck does that even mean, James? What the fuck does that even mean? James, I'm allowed to say things that you don't like on the internet. I didn't manipulate your stepdaughter into doing shit. You are continuing to lie about your stepdaughter publicly, continuing to throw lighter fluid on any chance you have of rebuilding a relationship with her. That's not my fault, James. That's your fault. I am absolutely allowed to say things you don't like. I'm absolutely allowed to say, she's giving me all this information when nothing in reality is happening. That's called playing chess, James. People do it all the time. It's not against Twitter's terms of service for me to say things that piss you off to get you to crash out on the internet. No, I absolutely lied when I made it seem like she told me all this private family information. She didn't, and I didn't ask for it. Let's see, what else? And then this person says, is she part of the woke right? And James says, I grift that way, but probably not really. More likely she's worked her way in there for shock value to get attention as an informant. Yeah, James, I'm a federal informant. Totally, bro. Totally. Let's see. Scrolling down James's timeline. Oh, yeah, there's Joel Berry saying it's satanic when James is the one lying. Well, I didn't dox anyone. I didn't groom anyone. I didn't harass anyone. We need to ensure X has a zero tolerance policy against doxing, grooming, and targeted harassment. These people and James Lindsay truly think that me saying things that James and his friends don't like is targeted harassment. That me DMing a 28-year-old grown adult is grooming, and that me posting a publicly available map that is literally linked in someone's Twitter profile is doxing. None of those things are true, guys. Sorry, you can keep crying all you want. None of that ain't true. Still retweeting, looking like a crazy person. We haven't even gotten to the really good stuff yet. The really good stuff, I don't even know. Oh my. Oh, he's retweeting right-wing watch. James is retweeting right-wing watch. That's crazy. That's crazy. Where's the stuff about Reagan? Look how much James tweets. This is nuts. I want to get to the stuff about Reagan. Retweeting Carrie all the time. Obsessed with Nick. Okay, Reagan, I got that link. Thank you. Okay, here it is. 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 Okay, so Carrie is tweeting about me again. Carrie, oh, another clip from James. I have hundreds. Holy shit. I haven't even seen this yet. Hang on. What does this clip say? Is this another W for me? In case you aren't aware of why I've started exposing the activity of my obsessed stalker, this clip is almost a year old and has her explaining she has been coordinating targeted harassment against me by and for months, and that it was needed to increase because I acknowledged it was bad. Okay, let's see what I actually said. And I wrote the book about fighting back against the woke left, and if James wants to act like a fucking leftist, then I will use everything in my book to combat this problem, because right now I actually view James Lindsay lying to millions of people about what queer theory is and what queer Marxism is and what's going on in the public schools and why it's happening. I actually view that to be a much more significant problem than what the left is doing. True. Because James is leading people down entirely the wrong fucking path. Yes. And we know it's wrong. There is no doubt in our minds that it is wrong. There is no doubt in anyone's minds who watches what we watch that he is being intellectually dishonest. True. W me. So we decided to start making fun of him. Yeah. One of the rules for the actively unwoke in my book is literally mock them relentlessly. Yeah. So we started making memes. We formed a reply guy army in James's Twitter feed. We did. We have been haranguing James for months and months and months to start saying the word capitalism. Yeah. Yeah, we did. Yeah. And I think he's finally lost it. Yeah, true. I think we're getting to him, and I'm going to show you why. But the thing is, this is, I just want to make sure we're clear about this. The fact that James Lindsay responded to what he responded to tonight tells me we need to up our numbers. This is a time to double down. We've now pissed James off.
True.
He's acting crazy. He's like this. Like everyone needs to make a new sock account on Twitter. I don't care if you've already made several sock accounts. Bot has like 27 sock accounts. Everyone needs to make a new sock account on Twitter. We need to up our game, yo. I want meme production going into overdrive on this.
James thinks that's all serious. That was a W clip. Another W clip. Where is James getting all these fabulous clips? Hang on.
And
hang on. Reagan, I'm going to put this in the chat. Can we make a screen recording of that and put it on the updates account, Reagan and/or bot? That was great. That was awesome. So James literally posted a clip of me where I'm saying James is lying to a lot of people and this is unacceptable, and I want to expose the fact that James is lying to a lot of people, and we all need to work together to expose the fact that James is lying to a lot of people. I mean, W? There's nothing wrong with that clip, James. Sorry. James says, I have hundreds of these clips now. Please post them, James. Please continue to post them. We're going to collect these clips, bro. It's really something to sit down and watch them. I haven't seen most of them because I have never seen anything of hers unless someone sends it to me directly, which is now often concerned for my safety. Hundreds, and it's the tip of the iceberg. Well, James, perhaps if you were an intellectually honest researcher, you would actually investigate for yourself what I'm saying on streams instead of taking clips out of context and then posting my W's on your timeline. Like, this isn't a secret. I've been doing this for a while. I'm live 6 days a week, James. You're welcome to come and actually watch the content directly instead of waiting for edited clips. Even though, again, I don't think there's anything wrong with that clip, but hey, whatever. And then Carrie says, this type of coordinated abuse and brigading using fake accounts is against X and Elon Musk TOS. Well, you know, people are allowed to have accounts, Carrie. I'm very sorry that you don't like it. And yet stalker and serial abuser Carlin has been doing this to multiple people, myself included. And yeah, okay, Carrie. And brags about it on other platforms. 4 years of this! Watch her give orders to her deranged, unstable cult. They take everything I say completely 100% seriously. It's so crazy. It's so crazy. Okay, so James, this is another clip that James tweeted. Let's see what happened here. Reagan is starring in this one. His audience will wake up to your good and accurate teaching. I appreciate that. So guys, the war on James is going to continue. And again, this is not just going to be me. Everyone who is sick of James's shit, I need you to make sure you have at least one Twitter account that is not blocked by James. If James has recently blocked your Twitter account, make sure you start a new one. Just go to like Proton Mail, get a burner email address, create a new Twitter account out of it. I know it's a little bit of a pain in the ass, but it's worth it. Make sure you have a YouTube account that is not blocked on the New Discourses YouTube channel. Make sure you are subscribed to the New Discourses YouTube channel, because one of the things that if you don't subscribe now, James can put a time limit on how long you have to be subscribed in order to interact and chat on his YouTube channel. So everyone, make sure you have your burner accounts ready. And don't use them willy-nilly. Don't just use them to poke at James, because James is now on a blocking spree. So we all have to coordinate this. All have your burner accounts ready on Twitter, on YouTube. Those are the main places we need them. And we're going to be waiting for our opportunity. Ooh, oh no. Guys, James might get replies that he doesn't like on his Twitter feed. Oh no. James might get replies that he doesn't like. Oh my God, this is an emergency. James is literally in physical danger because people are replying to his account with tweets he doesn't like. James says, it's not a question of whether or not my psychotic stalker is violating YouTube and X's terms of service. Well, yeah, it is, James, because I'm not banned, and good luck trying. She doesn't just admit to it. She actively encourages her rapidly dwindling following to make fake accounts and plan coordinated attacks. See, the thing is, James, if my following was rapidly dwindling, then you probably wouldn't be talking so much about me, would you? Too bad, so sad, bro. You reveal yourself. But here's the best part. You guys ready for Reagan's cameo? For what it's worth, Reagan, as you can see in this clip, is one of the psychotic stalker's chief lieutenants. She's effectively brainwashed in the cult. I don't have anything good to say about her either, obviously, but unlike Troll Blood Carlin, at least she's cute, I guess. Reagan, you better be careful. James is going to try to fuck you. Don't go to any of his events, Reagan. Don't go to any of his events. James is literally sexually harassing you on the internet, Reagan. I mean, Reagan's not my lieutenant. Reagan is my chief organizational officer of the cult. She has an official title and everything. Reagan, please pick yourself out something nice from the Unwoke Art Store to make up for this trouble that James is causing. I want to send you a t-shirt. Let's see. Blah, blah, blah. James replying here. Looks like there's a more interesting story going on here than a disgusting little psychopath. What are they saying? Okay, she's so consistent and frequent in her flagrant violations of terms of service here and on other platforms that her... Oh my God. James thinks my accounts are intentionally protected. James, have you never heard of A-logging, bro? Are you so unhinged from the internet that you don't know that A-logging is a thing on the internet? There are a lot of A-logs on the internet, James. I'm A-logging you right now, James. This isn't targeted harassment. This happens all the time. Yeah, I'm with the FBI. Yeah, okay, sure, James. She's so consistent and frequent in her flagrant violation of terms of service and her on other platforms that her account must be internally protected. Seeing how she randomly went full groiper, well, it actually wasn't that random. It was a very specific thing that happened. Maybe she's actually working with the FBI against them. Wait, James is insinuating that I'm infiltrating the groipers on behalf of the FBI? Bro. I think we need to change it to J Anon, because this is bigger than Gnostic. This is bigger than Gnostic. We need to change this to J Anon. James Anon. He's going full J Anon. Wow, James. Wow. I think I've heard her say she has a source at X. Oh, yeah, okay. That can get her any recorded space. That's not a... Okay. These people are so fucking crazy. Poetry Painter thinks I have a secret source at X that can get me any space, even if it's not recorded. No, James. No, psycho. That's called a bot. The Groipers have a bot that can download any X space as long as you have the link for it, even if it was not recorded. You think I have some inside source at fucking Twitter that's sending me recordings that you don't want me to have? No. It's a bot, assholes. James retweets that out to his audience. I think Carlin has a secret source at Twitter. This is crazy. James says she didn't go full narcissist. We just didn't recognize it when she first burst onto the scene, saying things helpful to our causes. She's always been a dangerous psychopath who we failed to successfully gatekeep. And now James is admitting that everything that he's doing is about gatekeeping my work because I say things that James doesn't like that are inconvenient to the bullshit that he's trying to sell his audience. Keep talking about me, Jimmy. You're going to make my work explode. Let's see, what else? Blah, da, 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 da. We're still only in today. They're posting, oh, James retweeted this too. James is literally retweeting everything that fat fucking 500-pound shut-in poetry painter says about me. Carrie's talking about it. She's been going full-bore war on me for about a year and a half, actually, James. But there was a hard nagging period to trying to get my attention to that before that for several months before. No, James, we've actively been staging a war on you for a year and a half. Before that, she was still doing her borderline idealization act. No, James. Before that, every time someone complained about you, I covered for your ass. That's what was happening, James. I covered for you when you were being an asshole. And it just this is all on James's timeline. But is there anything more about me? So I'm basically James's #1 enemy on the internet, and that actually serves me quite well, I think. Is that it? Did he have any more hissy fits? I think that's enough. There was some stuff last night too, but I just don't feel like going back and finding it. All right, so that is the update on James's unhinged meltdown about me. Does anyone have any questions? That was crazy. That took us like half an hour to go through. That's how much James has been tweeting about me today. So we're obviously doing something right. Herv says, the ironic part for James is that the woke right turned me away from him and delivered me back to Carlin. Hey, welcome, Herv. Welcome, Herv. We're glad that you're here. You're going to see the real shit here, not any of James's bullshit. Yeah, James is a little crazy. Yep. A-logging is basically where you kind of like hate watch someone to make fun of them. And A-logging happens all over the internet all the time. It's not against terms of service. James is a public person with 500,000 followers on Twitter. He can whine and cry all he wants. I've actually been in front of judges where I needed to get a restraining order for someone on the internet acting like a psycho. And one of the first things the judge said is, you're on social media. People can say a lot of stuff about you. And I said, yeah, I know, but he's threatening to come to my house. And so then the judge, because he was threatening to come to my house, the judge gave me the restraining order. But like in terms of like speech on the internet, the judge was like, don't bring any of this social media bullshit in with me. The judge really didn't like that. I was like, I'm not. I swear, he's threatening to come to my house. So James is nuts. I win. James loses. And now we're going to go to our documentary. Today, guys, we're going to be spending the rest of our time, not talking about James because, listen, and this is actually real what I'm about to say. I really think that James is trying to provoke me. I think that he's trying to get me to spurg out and like yell or something and have a meltdown on the internet. Because quite frankly, a couple of years ago, I would have done that because I was new to all this a couple of years ago. I had never been attacked on the internet the way that I was a couple of years ago. It was a very new thing and it is very off-putting and, kind of like, it is a little crazy when a whole bunch of people first start coming at you on the internet and saying all this absurd shit. I had a nervous breakdown like 2 years ago over it. So it's not that I'm unsympathetic to like people who get A-logged on the internet. That happened to me for a long time. But I think what's happening right now is that James is trying to intentionally provoke me into getting angry or shouting on the internet or like having an emotional breakdown. And that's just not going to happen because I may have had a nervous breakdown a couple years ago when I had a group of people that were trying to harass me to get me to kill myself. That was real. That actually did happen. But I learned a lot from that experience. Things are different now. James is behaving like a psychotic person. He's been behaving like a psychotic person for a while. And he's in his own little meltdown. And I'm not going to allow James's unhinged lunacy that anyone with a working brain knows is not true. We're not going to allow that to get in the way of doing what we're doing. I'm not going to do a whole episode about James. The only reason we've talked about him so much is because he was tweeting about me all fucking day. But I want to watch this documentary, and I want to enjoy this documentary, and I think other people are going to enjoy this documentary, and that's what we're going to do. So
No more talk about James for the rest of the stream. Can we all agree on that? Even if James starts tweeting unhinged absurdity, even if James's people come into the chat and try to cause problems, we're just going to ignore them and block them, because we are not going to allow these assholes who don't care about anything. They don't care about anything. They have no goals beyond what can get them attention and clout on the internet. We are not going to be those people. If I do have a cult, and if people actually listen to me, then that is not the type of cult that we're going to be. We are going to be people that focus on an actual problem, that think deeply about that problem, that have a nuanced perspective about that problem, and that are able to act like, I don't know, full-blown fucking adults. That's my expectation. People will act like adults. If you don't want to, that's fine. There's the door. You don't have to be here, okay? So we're going to watch this documentary about the fall of the International Socialist Organization. Before we get into that, just a reminder, guys, if you want to keep up with what I'm doing, head over to my Substack. That is Carlyn, KARLYN.substack.com. Sign up for email updates. You can do that for free. You can also donate to support my work for $8 a month, $80 a year. And I am 100% funded by you guys. I really appreciate that you guys allow me to do what I do. We've got some new content up on the Substack. We've got a new episode of the Counter-Revolutionary Book Club, which we did yesterday on stream. We read the first part of a book called Against the Gender Nightmare, which is crazy. And it's only going to get crazier. This book is going to be in at least 4 or 5 parts, depending on how long it takes to get through it. But it is actually a rather long document. And so we analyzed a bunch of it yesterday. The podcast is up there. It's about 2 hours long. You can currently subscribe to the podcast via the Substack. You just go to the book club link or go into the episode, and that will give you the links to subscribe in the Substack. You can also subscribe on Apple Podcasts. You can subscribe on Spotify. If you're on Apple Podcasts or Spotify, I would really appreciate it if you would give the Counter-Revolutionary Book Club a 5-star rating. That would be really great. So that's one of the things that you can do, is catch up on that project. If you're looking for the book list, there's the book list that we're reading. You can find all the materials there. I also have stories up about the executive orders that Trump issued on his first day. Now, Trump has just issued a new executive order within the last 24 hours that basically eliminates affirmative action. And I'm going to be putting up an article about that. I didn't get a chance to finish it for the stream, but that move is actually going to have really far-reaching implications insofar as public universities. And I got to say, man, I got to give Trump credit. I have to give Trump credit. Trump has basically just annihilated the ability of public universities to do DEI training or to do affirmative action. So bravo, Trump, man. Bravo, Trump. They're going to have to eliminate all their DEI offices. They can't do the training. They can't consider race or identity or any of those things in terms of admission to the university or in hiring or things like that. And this is going to open up a massive opportunity for hunting down documents at public universities. Because I worked in higher education for 10 years, and I can tell you, public universities are not going to give this up without a fight. They're just not going to. And so if we want to have fun, we can start hunting down documents at public universities to see, are they still in violation of this executive order or are they not? That could be a fun little project. I will have an article going up on the Substack later today about that. I will also have an article going up about how critical race theory is still taught in schools all over the place. And guess what? They're actually starting to admit that critical race theory means capitalism. Duh. I've been saying that for a while. So that's what you can support over on my Substack, guys. It's the most nuanced analysis about the far left and the woke left that you're going to find on the internet. And I'm just going to give you the facts. I do not have a political narrative. I do not have political masters. My only job is to tell you the truth and to show you the receipts. I will always show you the primary sources. You can always go and investigate. You never have to trust me. If I'm really as crazy as James keeps trying to say that I am, I wouldn't be giving out the primary sources because I would just be lying to you guys like he is. But I want you to look at the primary sources. I want you to see for yourself. So everything I do has primary sources, and you can find that over on the Substack. Again, that's Carlyn, KARLYN.substack.com. And yes, he did pardon Ross Ulbricht, and that's really, really good. And I had a lot of feelings about that, to be honest, because, you know,
I was thinking back last night. Obviously, I had a friend that went to prison for a crime that I know he didn't commit, that everyone in our lives know he didn't commit, but that the internet thinks is like he's a horrible, heinous person, but he's not. And I stood by his side for 8.5 years through federal prison. And I remember succinctly what it was like the very first time that I saw him outside of prison after 8.5 years. And I had a lot of emotions last night thinking about like that in relation to Ross Ulbricht, because Ross Ulbricht should have never gone to jail. Ross Ulbricht built a website. He didn't participate in any sale of illegal drugs, but people sold drugs on the website that he built. And the real reason they went after Ross Ulbricht is he was using Bitcoin, and this is in the early stages of Bitcoin, and they didn't want him using Bitcoin, so the government went after him for using Bitcoin. And by the way, the amount of Bitcoin that the government confiscated from Ross Ulbricht, if he had that Bitcoin today, he would have over $1 billion. Like, how crazy is that? That shows you like how ahead of things he was. And so I think it's awesome that Trump released him and pardoned him, like a full pardon. I think that that's really great. I cannot imagine the range of emotions that him and his mom are going through, because his mom, Lynn, fought tirelessly for him every single day for a decade. And I gotta say, man, again, like, I've been through that long wait of someone being in federal prison that you love for a long time. I cannot imagine what she went through. I really can't. And so I'm really glad that Trump kept his word on that one. I think that's a really good thing. And I hope that Trump also pursues more reform in the criminal justice system, because now all these stories are starting to come out about all the people the feds went after January 6th and in the past 4 years. And it's just totally and completely corrupt. And I knew it was corrupt a long time ago. It's not as though it just started getting corrupt with Trump. You know, they've always been corrupt. But I really hope that Trump, in the next 4 years, does something to reform the justice system, because there are a lot of innocent people in jail that shouldn't be there. And I hope that people don't forget that it's more than just J6ers. It's more than just Ross Ulbricht. There are a lot of innocent people in prison that shouldn't be there, that got fucked over by the system. My friend was one of those people. I saw directly the ramifications of that. And I think that Trump has now seen inside the evil of the justice system in a way that he hadn't yet during his first term. And I think that I really hope that he does more to solve it in the next 4 years. So I thought that that was a really good thing. All right, guys, let's enough chit chat. Let's get into our show, shall we? Let's get into our documentary. I'm actually really excited to watch this. I really, really am. Everyone, please mount the like button for me if you would be so kind. Please make sure you are subscribed to the channel if you are not already. And let's get started. We're going to go with part 1, the origins of a cult. Ooh. And this is called Fear and Loathing in the International Socialist Organization, Chapter 1. I hope this is good. I'm really interested in
Content
this
warning.
story.
This series deals with the topic of sexual assault. Viewer discretion is advised. It was a cold autumn evening in downtown Chicago during the heyday of 2011's Occupy movement. I was at a Chipotle with several other people after one of the General Assembly meetings. We were all members of the International Socialist Organization, or ISO, who had gotten together to discuss the start of what ended up just being a blip in history. I remember one person with us was skeptical that Occupy would go anywhere. He was concerned that it was interrupting other projects that the group was involved with. This led to a heated discussion, but it remained relatively civil. I remember one person stating that we had to participate in Occupy per the ISO leadership's orders. I recall him saying to all of us, "How can we get the comrade to agree with the cadre line? This should have been my warning."
That's interesting. So people in the International Socialist Organization had to participate in Occupy Wall Street. So that this would have been around, what was that, like 2009, 2010?
Sign that I had joined a cult. Unfortunately, this revelation wouldn't reach my still teenage brain for yet another year. Then, I saw only how I would ever disagree with the group's official stances. It really felt like a secular version of church. So this begs the question, why did I join? Well, it was because they were the largest radical socialist organization in the country. Capping out at maybe 1,200 members at their peak, it might seem like a rather small group in the grand scheme of things. However, this was just the state of the American radical left before 2016. You have to remember, this was the era of those hideous Joker Obama memes with a "Why So Socialist" caption underneath. It was really not a popular brand of politics. So what happened to them? Long story short, an accusation of a...
Hang on, offensive sane. Hang on. Are we celebrating our socialists getting weaker? No, socialists are going to get stronger over the next 4 years. They're going to get stronger. You're not going to see... Well, okay, so this is a documentary about something that took place like a while ago, like 10 years ago, 10 to 15 years ago, something like that. So this is about the downfall of the International Socialist Organization, which has since been replaced with Haymarket Books, which is the largest socialist book publisher and doing better than they ever have been. So don't mistake this. Like, socialists are not getting weaker. I just want to know the history of this. Yes, Tim Pool was at Occupy. Yes, he was. That's how he got famous.
Massive sexual assault cover-up did them in. The group's aging leadership finally let go of their firm grip on power, and the new leaders were alerted to an alleged case of sexual assault that a former member claims she was forced to sweep under the rug. Then this begs the question, how did it get to that point? That is an incredibly long, sordid tale that few have ever told. Now, while many would consider this obscure commie nonsense, I think it's important to realize that these people all just didn't disappear. Many, including some involved in this alleged cover-up, have joined other left-wing groups, including the now very prominent Democratic Socialists of America, a group that has elected politicians across the country, and as of this recording, 4 sitting members in Congress. Beyond
as a reminder, most far-left socialists do not believe that the Democratic Socialists of America are actually socialists. It's the difference between being a revolutionary and being a reformer, where they believe that the Democratic Socialists of America are reformers. They want to use the electoral process to reform the system, whereas revolutionaries want to overthrow the system. There are far-left groups that specifically will not allow their members to be a part of the Democratic Socialists of America. There's also a Marxist caucus within the Democratic Socialists of America that exists solely to try to pull the Democratic Socialists of America more left to get them to be more radicalized. So there is like when we're thinking about the socialists that we like to watch, they are usually not associated with the Democratic Socialists of America because the Democratic Socialists of America are not far enough left for them. Antifa was at the inauguration. They had a whole guillotine in front of the White House. Antifa was at the inauguration. They weren't violent this time, which I think is actually a good thing, and that actually surprised me, and I was actually happy to hear that. But they were there. But it just wasn't covered by a lot of outlets. But they were absolutely there. We watched some of it on the channel.
That major players in Chicago progressive politics have also been members. Some of them have even donated to the group itself. One of these donors was Jesse Sharkey, former president of the Chicago Teachers Union. The ISO also ran a book publisher called Haymarket Books, which still exists and appears to have some former members running it. Haymarket is widely cited by many progressive scholars, yet few know it was founded by a cult. So, here we are. To be totally candid, this is not something I've ever really wanted to make, because it really shouldn't be my story to tell. However, nobody else really has outside of some small blog posts and some document dumps and maybe a few tweets. No one has been willing to publish a story on the ISO. Just speaking for myself, I've tipped off some reporters. I've even pitched a few stories to reputable magazines.
I need to reach out to this
person. I even went so far to write a small piece concerning how this affects the existing
I need to reach out to this person and interview them. We need to find this person. They need to come on my channel.
Socialist movement. It was rejected after I submitted it, despite the editor accepting the pitch beforehand. So, before we begin, a few caveats. So, this piece is largely meant to be journalistic in nature. However, I have to admit my own bias. As I stated earlier, I was originally a member of this group, so as such, if you wish to disregard this video in its entirety, please do. I would encourage you to do your own research. I will have links to all of my sources below, as well as at the end of the video. I may include some commentary as well. This is largely my opinion, and if you hear words like I, me, my, that's your sign it's commentary. That commentary is solely from myself. Others who may have assisted in this production may have different thoughts on the matter. So with all of this out of the way, let's dive into the history of the ISO. The story of the ISO technically begins in the late 1920s, with the death of Vladimir Ilyich Lenin, paramount leader of the newly formed Union of Soviet Socialist Republics. As the USSR became an oligarchy run by the Bolsheviks, a power struggle ensued between Joseph Stalin and Leon Trotsky. Both.
There it goes. Well, so Offensive Saint says if Trump doesn't arrest the main AAAs, which AAAs means authors, activists, and academics, the leaders on the far left, he's mostly useless. I don't agree with that. Listen, okay, do I think that Trump is going to stamp out the problem of the far left in the next 4 years? No, I don't. Not in any way. And it's not because I don't want him to. I would, if I'm wrong about that, I will be thrilled that I'm wrong about that, right? But I will say that Trump's initial executive orders, I do think are going to have an impact. I think they're going to have an impact. I mean, DEI has basically been wiped out on like in higher education, in public higher education. It's probably going to be wiped out in like schools that are receiving federal funding as well. That's a really good thing. I know that Nick says that saying there are only two genders is cringe, and he's right about that. But the thing of it is that the gender binary is something that actually does need to be protected at all costs, because the left is actively attacking the gender binary all the time. And so that actually is an important step. It means that public schools, I think, won't be able to get federal funding if they're teaching gender ideology, which I think is a really good thing. This affirmative action thing that Trump just did is good. So I have to say, like, I won't say that I think that he's useless. I think that the steps that he's taken in the first couple of days are actually incredibly useful. I think they're good things. Do I think it solves the problem completely? No, I don't. But we should celebrate the wins where we can, because you got to understand, man, like, I was around initially when people were finding out about critical race theory, and it was damn near impossible to get anything done around it. And this is probably like the first really big blow against the left that they've experienced in a while. So is it perfect? No. Are there things that Trump's doing that I have criticisms of? Yes. But it's a good start. He's got 4 years. It's a long time.
Both were well-known political and military leaders during the Russian Civil War, but differed bitterly on politics. Stalin wanted the Soviets to focus on modernization and establishing their nation as a world power. Trotsky, on the other hand, was willing to continue the strict revolutionary and militant character of the USSR. He wanted to continue to intervene in foreign affairs deeply, fomenting world revolution across the globe. However, Stalin was able to outmaneuver Trotsky politically, and in 1927 expelled him from government. 2 years later, Trotsky would be exiled from the Soviet Union, moving from country to country until one of Stalin's agents assassinated him with an ice pick in Mexico. During his years in exile, Trotsky developed a political movement that became known as Trotskyism. Effectively, it amounted to continued criticism of the USSR and its allies and support for global revolution. However, Trotsky always insisted the USSR was worth saving as an institution in itself. He argued it still, at its core, was a socialist country.
However, the Trotskyist movement was grappling with a whole new phenomena, a new social system that had just come into existence in the previous decade. And they could not, and were confused about its relationship from the degeneration of the Russian Revolution and the Russian worker state to the Stalinist counter-revolution. They thought that Russia still remained a worker state because they were still carrying a lot of baggage from the degeneration. Trotsky had to change his point of view in the 1930s. For example, first he came out for the right of factions in the early 30s. Then in 1936 he came out against the one-party state. These were things that he was changing in terms of his point of view in retrospect as to what had occurred in terms of the rise of Stalinism. But he still thought that because there was nationalized property that had come out of the revolution, Russia remained a worker state. The bureaucracies are not classes, they serve ruling classes. The ruling class in Russia was the working class, even though, as he said, it was totally politically expropriated. It was, he said, in its political forms, not much different from fascism. However, economically, it was socialistic in character through nationalized property.
But as Soviet foreign policy started moving in directions that many found distasteful, splits began to emerge in the movement. These eventually occurred with such frequency that Trotskyist political schisms are often mocked in left circles today. The first of these splits were from an ideological current we broadly can call unorthodox Trotskyism or Third Campism. These socialists usually broke in the late 30s due to the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact between Nazi Germany and the Soviet Union. They argued that the USSR had become no less of an imperialist nation, and that mindlessly giving them critical support was against their interests as socialists.
The traditional Trotskyist point of view was you defend the Soviet Union against imperialist attack because it is a worker state and therefore any war it engages in is a progressive war. Well, what do you do when the Soviet Union attacks, conquers, and occupies other countries? Trotsky and the Trotskyist movement said you have to support it because it's a worker state. You have to tell the workers of Poland, Finland, Estonia to greet and support the Russian Red Army as it invades your country. Okay? A minority inside the American Trotskyist movement, Max Shachtman, C.L.R. James, Martin Aburn, James Burnham, Hal Draper, Raya Dunayevskaya, and others object. They immediately say, this is an imperialist war. It's a reactionary war. They say war, they raise the Marxist proposition. War is the continuation of other politics by forcible means. It's carried out by classes in their interest. This is a reactionary war to start World War II and for Russian imperialism, and it is not in the interest of the working class. It's an imperialist war.
This tradition is where the ISO stems from. As mentioned, these splits eventually would become commonplace in the Trotskyist movement. Numerous small groups would form as infighting would break out into factionalism. The opposition would either be expelled or quit en masse and form a new group. One of these myriad offshoot groups from the original Trotskyist movement was a group known as the International Socialists. IS was formed in 1964 by activists Hal Draper and Jill Geyer in response to the dissolution of the Socialist Party of America, the same SPA that ran Eugene V. Debs for president from jail during World War I, winning over 1 million votes. It had also been the political home of notable civil rights movement leader Bayard Rustin. Rustin had brought many of Mohandas K. Gandhi's nonviolent tactics from the Indian independence movement to the attention of a young minister and civil rights activists named Martin Luther King Jr. Many Third Camp Trotskyites joined the SPA, becoming the radical left wing of the party. This caused internal issues, culminating ironically in the SPA itself imploding. Some went on to form a more moderate group, some joined the Democrats, others attempted to make a new socialist party, and others, like the IS, went off in a different direction entirely. The IS wanted to be a mass socialist organization, but it soon realized it was a small group of mostly young college students. As the group puttered into the 1970s, IS decided to move away from the typical student activism that had been popularized by the now defunct organization Students for a Democratic Society, and instead started a policy of industrialization. This meant these white-collar, college-educated 20-somethings would go get jobs in industry and become factory workers or day laborers.
From 73 to 74, there's a turn to industry by the IS. There's a policy of industrialization, which is to select, in the view of some of the leadership of the IS, you select the most important industries because those are the most important industries for American capitalism. So if you conquer those industries, You got him. Yeah, really got him. Which did elicit the comment once from Tony Cliff, said, well, why don't they just move to Japan? He was not at the time aware of the decline of Japan, but I'm just throwing that in as a little swipe at that perspective.
By all accounts, the organization succeeded in theory. Most got involved in their local union and began to work in opposition to the union leadership. By the late 70s, however, this method showed severe limitations and hit snags.
So again,
for example, was demoralization and adaptation, I guess would be the two words I would say. One was many members became demoralized from the lack of success of what most of the rank and file work.
Okay, I keep trying to pause it. It's not pausing. So what this is saying is they came in and tried to take over the unions, and now they're talking about how they don't feel like that's successful. But remember, guys, most people involved in the unions are socialist, and we know that socialist groups are today using the unions to recruit because the Revolutionary Communists of America told us explicitly on their recruiting call that we infiltrated that they're using the unions to recruit. So I don't know exactly what year they're talking about here, but you know, I can understand why they may be less than thrilled with the success they had trying to take over the unions, but I will tell you, they are absolutely trying to do the same thing again right now.
Wasn't very successful. And adaptation, that is, there was a tendency among industrializing students to, and this was accentuated both by the mass work perspective, which said we should be able to lead even the most backward worker, that was put that way, but also by the misreading of the period. That is, workers were not radicalizing at that point. And so you went into a workplace, you want to fit in, you want to be a worker. And so you became uber worker. You know, as students tended to, in order to fit in and not feel like the sore thumb, hi, I'm a social, no, I'll put on the flag and put on a leather jacket and be a worker. And so it had an impact on people, which was actually conservatizing, and they adapted culturally and also politically to a climate that was not conducive to building and sustaining not just rank and file organization, but rank and file organization that's a transmission belt towards revolutionary politics, which was the idea.
The group started to become more conservative in its messaging as these blue-collar jobs became their livelihoods. This conservatism was not a rightward shift in beliefs, but a change in active political messaging.
As they actually adapt more to the workplace environment than are able to provide some kind of left-wing political lead. And so actually the direction of many of the activists is in a more conservatizing direction. You know, don't bring out your newspaper because somebody's going to give you shit about it. Don't talk about socialism. Just talk about trade union issues. You know, a kind of more of a political retreat as a result.
In 1974, IS's leadership began obsessing over the Carnation Revolution in Portugal, which overthrew the fascist Estado Novo regime that had ruled the nation since the 1930s. IS saw this as a herald of Trotsky's world revolution. It now celebrated and fantasized about the failed coup of this new democratic government of Portugal by communist-aligned soldiers in 1975.
Anticipation that, quote, from memory, the huge battalions of labor will come to us, that is, in an economic political rebellion from below. That the Portuguese Revolution would, in the initial instance, if not be defeated, at least produce a much bigger PRP and a bigger revolutionary left. That so rapidly, from 74 to 76, disappears.
In 1976, a group of disgruntled IS members, led by Cal and Barbara Winslow, consisting of young radicals and international members, formed an opposition group called the Left Faction.
There's a whole series of arguments made by a group called the Left Faction, which was 59, well, the document that I have is 59 people signed it. Ahmed can maybe correct on the exact numbers, but that document had 59 people signing it. I think at the time the organization had maybe 250 or 300 at the most members, I'm not sure, the IS, essentially argued a number of points about the IS's perspective. The main ones being the perspective is not realistic. What we thought was going to pan out, it did not. We are not, the conditions of class struggle right now are not such that you can build a workers' combat organization, but primarily what they questioned was the whole idea of industrializing all of their members, because they said that was leading to a conservatization of the membership.
The faction fight was bitter and held inside the mailed convention bulletins. Members would submit polemics on political issues to an office, and it would be mailed out. Like a newsletter, just with more arguing. Actually, it could be compared to a primitive version of Reddit. These biting critiques were all over the place. Barbara Winslow and Joel Geyer even went at it over Portugal. In 1977, the annual IS convention was held, and was split between the left faction, the IS's majority faction, which consisted of the leadership, and the Political Solution Caucus, who wanted to negotiate a compromise. The majority faction decided to utilize obscure rules and bureaucracy to their advantage, pushing a resolution to expel the left faction. This angered a third of the membership. This is when the International Socialist Organization was born. Now, this tiny new group did not have many resources or members. It used what it had to organize on college campuses, as well as strengthening its international affiliations, specifically with a British group, which would later on be known as the Socialist Workers' Party, sometimes referred to as the SWP.
Pause. There we go. I just want to point this out. When the ISO started, and this is very common with socialist groups, guys, we've seen this happen over and over and over again, where socialist groups splinter off and they create new things, and there's like infighting, and then one group gets pissed off at another group and they form their own thing. Like, we see this happen all the time. What I want to point out, though, is that when the International Socialist Organization started, it was teeny, teeny, tiny. They didn't have many people. They were being scrappy about it. They were going onto college campuses. They were handing out leaflets and flyers. They were working with what they had. They made alliances where they could. We've covered some SWP stuff from the UK. Not a lot, because I tend not to cover UK stuff, but we've covered some stuff from them before. But my big point is this, is like, especially on the internet, people get tricked into thinking that if you don't have tens of thousands of people, as I obviously don't, that you can't make an impact. But I just reject that as a philosophy. I think that we need to find the right people who are motivated, who understand nuance, who are interested in learning, who are interested in going out and doing some scrappy underdog things. I want to do flyering. We're going to do a whole, I keep saying this, but I've got a whole initiative planned around zines and flyering and stickering and all that. I want to go into the real world and actually do stuff. I don't want to dick around online. We need to go find our people in the real world. We need to go recruit people in the real world. Basically do kind of like a monkey see, monkey do, where looking at what the left did, because I do think that organizing in the real world is actually significantly more effective than dicking around on Twitter all day. That's where we need to be looking. And we need to find people who are willing to do that. We need to find people who are willing to go in a coffee shop and hang up a flyer. And I'll provide you with the flyer. I'll give you something to print out. Like, go in and hang stuff up. Go in and put a sticker on a thing. Go into a bookstore and leave some stuff around. Yeah, like we need to find people who are interested in doing like the street team stuff. And if we get, you know, several dozen people who are interested in doing street team stuff and doing stuff in the real world, that to me is more effective than like having all these people on Twitter who just spend all day on Twitter and go mentally insane on Twitter, you know?
The SWP UK was led by Tony Cliff, an activist born in then Ottoman-controlled Palestine and known for his unique brand of Trotskyism. The main part of his theories was that the socialist states in existence were actually state capitalist, and that real socialism had never been tried. Cliff started to insert his particular brand of Marxism in all the groups under the so-called International Socialist tradition. Part of this ideology was a strong criticism of identity politics, particularly feminism. Cliff is rumored to have said feminism wasn't a strong, empowered woman, like how Hollywood would portray them, but in reality...
Isn't that interesting? So the original International Socialist Organization was critical of identity politics. This is something that we see with the queer Marxists, where the queer Marxists rejected identity of politics entirely because they don't want there to be any categories of identity.
All of the groups under the so-called International Socialist tradition. Part of this ideology was a strong criticism of identity politics, particularly feminism. Cliff is rumored to have said feminism wasn't a strong, empowered woman, like how Hollywood would portray them, but in reality was someone like his wife, who raised the children and was the primary breadwinner. Cliff was unable to gain employment, partially due to his politics, and also because he was stateless. Feminist journals, in particular one where Barbara Winslow was a frequent contributor, were shut down at Cliff's behest. A journal that focused on race politics, penned by a group of black socialists, was also closed. The Winslows continued to be leading members in the group until the early 80s, when a member of the British International Socialists by the name of Ahmed Sarawi began making moves against them. Originally from Egypt, he grew up in England and moved to the United States to attend Brown University in Rhode Island, before eventually settling down in Chicago. He is better known by his pen name, Ahmed Shawki. According to one source, the Winslows were the only elected officers in the entire ISO, which upset some of the members. Others suggest that it was at the behest of Cliff and the SWP that the Winslows were even removed. In 2004, Barbara recounted her time with the group.
I mean, when I was in the IS and the ISO, I was not a nice person. I think, whatever it was, my personality in a sectarian group brought out the worst in me. Once I left the group, most people weren't very nice, you know? Having spent all those years in this group, you had to be hard, and you had to be this, and you had to be that. I struggled very hard about it. The only thing I can say about myself is I did not like who I was when I was in that group. I didn't have any friends. I didn't have a life. I'm better off not being in a sectarian group.
In October of 1983, Shawki and his allies pushed for a special convention, shifting the leadership to a steering committee with no clear chair or leader. In effect, Shawki consolidated leadership amongst his allies, including his wife, Sharon Smith. Others in leadership included Paul D'Amato and eventually Joe Geyer, who joined the ISO after the IS collapsed. They then moved their organization's HQ over to Chicago. The ISO would then consolidate and weather the 1980s as socialism was a harder item to sell, further limiting them to college campuses. They would operate primarily as a propaganda group, pushing their radical ideas to students in the hopes that eventually the political situation would improve. In 1985, Shawki was interviewed by the Chicago Tribune, where he and the local ISO members highlighted their difficulties, but also their philosophy. They explained to the reporter that they thought capitalism would become untenable, and that socialism would eventually win the day. The Tribune reported that the ISO was at about 200 members, with 20 in Chicago. Shawki was unemployed. A year later, the group's activities near the Northwestern campus gained the ire of one concerned individual, who penned the following letter.
Dear, I have learned some of the details of the operation of a communist cult based in Chicago, and I think that the FBI should be informed. The group is called the International Socialist Organization, and they operate out of, if you can believe it, Northwestern University in Evanston, Illinois, and out of some buildings in Chicago itself. Their stated aim is the violent revolutionary overthrow of the United States government.
You don't say!
There were the organizers of the attack on the Contra leader at Northwestern University.
You don't
They divert money from university coffers into the organization's accounts through false, honoraria, and misrepresented fundraising activities. Their main activity is recruiting and brainwashing impressionable college students and transforming them into obedient communist troublemakers.
You don't say.
I have observed this frightening transformation in a friend of mine. I believe the group used sex, drugs, and liquor and brainwashing techniques on him. The cult seems to me to be very much like the Moonies, only worse, because they seek to do damage to American society through violence. They have recruited and brainwashed a very rich Northwestern student who could be a source of lots of cash in the future. The cult is headed by a charismatic leader who totally dominates everyone in the cult. He is an communist educated in England. He doesn't work, he is supported by cult money, drives a fancy car, and he has a green card because of his marriage to an American girl, a brainwashed member of the cult.
Wow.
The name is... He advocates the violent revolutionary overthrow of the U.S. government. He promises the members of the cult a triumphant future in a new era, with him as great leader and the others as his faithful lieutenants. They seem to buy it after the brainwashing. This cult recruits lonely or uncertain students through kindness. They meet their potential recruits at meetings they sponsor on campus at Northwestern and other schools around the country. They use drugs, have their women attend potential recruits, and ply them with liquor and sex. They brainwash potential recruits through constant indoctrination and social pressure, finally making them go out on the street and sell communist newspaper. They are amazingly successful at turning intelligent students into robots. The cult turns recruits into fighters for communism who I believe would kill if given the order by. They turn promising college students into mindless soldiers of communism who dream of the day when they can destroy our society. I saw a friend of mine go through this transformation. He was a very bright young man of Irish and English extraction. He was lonely and uncertain of his future. He fell somehow into clutches. I know he was seduced by one of their women. Once he was indoctrinated, she left him. My friend used to be cheerful and talkative, but he changed. He would rant about communism. Whenever you talked to him, he lost his friends. Eventually, a member of his family caught on to what was happening and came to Chicago to take him away. He was on the right track until this cult got a hold of him. It was a terrible tragedy. I find it very difficult to believe that Northwestern allows this to happen to its students.
I just want to...
Another case I know of was that...
There we go. I just want to say, I've been undercover at socialist events. It has not been my experience that they're doing all that. That's not to say maybe they were, but listen, and I do call socialism a cult, and I do actually believe that the far left is a cult. I believe it's a cult in which people are indoctrinated into it through the public schools, through the teaching of socialist ideology dripped out throughout the entire public school curriculum, starting in kindergarten. So I actually do believe the far left is a cult. I don't believe that this is happening based on my direct experience being undercover at some of their events. But that's not to say there aren't other cult-like things about it. So, okay, this is actually kind of amusing, though.
That of a young woman who was living in Chicago. She was recruited by the ISO, and she too lost her grip on reality. She killed herself. I hope this cult can somehow be stopped. He is a menace, and he wields terrible power over his communist subordinates. It would be best to neutralize him before he gets bigger, like Sun Myung Moon or Lyndon LaRouche. If he gets this rich girl's money, he could develop the means to do even more damage to America and her people. I shudder to think about the possibilities. The rich girl I am speaking of, named, she is or was a Northwestern student. Her parents live in...
One more thing, it is absolutely true that they do want to radically overthrow the federal government. It is 100% true that they do want to violently overthrow the federal government, and that obviously is why we watch so much of this stuff, because I do believe that this is actually a dangerous thing. I think there are more people involved in the far left than people think there are, and their explicit and stated goal is they want to overthrow the federal government.
Their phone number is she needs help. Think what might have happened if the SLA had got money. The cult has an office somewhere near there. Their office phone number is 312-752-1500. It is listed under Aardvark Typesetting Enterprises. This office is in a residential building. It is where they publish their communist newspaper. Perhaps that is illegal and you can have them evicted. If you can get them thrown out, that might help. Travels to England to see other communists there. If you could restrict his travel or deport him, that would be very good for the United States and Northwestern University and its students. I have seen a friend destroyed, and I am very worried that this cult might continue to operate or even get worse. Sincerely, a concerned citizen.
Ignoring the author's obvious hysteria, the redacted bit about the leader is likely referencing Shockey. It shows a rather exaggerated look into how the ISO actually operated, selling newspapers and running endless amounts of meetings. As a former member, I can't say I was lured in with sex and drugs, all that other stuff. However, I also wasn't around in 1986. I wasn't born until the 1990s, easily the worst decade of the 20th century to be a socialist. But the ISO soon defied the odds and grew.
All right, we got part one down. Part one down. Okay, I'm already loving this. This is a great documentary. I need to find this person and get them on my channel. Part two coming up. Activists to peddlers.
Content warning. This series deals with the topic of sexual assault. Viewer discretion is advised.
Good music, too. You have our info? Yeah! Thank you, Reagan. Awesome.
In every country in the world, a huge tribe of party hacks and sleek little are busy proving that socialism means no more than a planned state. Capitalism, with the grab motive left intact. But fortunately, there also exists a vision of socialism quite different from this. The thing that attracts ordinary men to socialism and makes them willing to risk their skins for it. The mystique of socialism is the idea of equality. To the vast majority of people, socialism means a classless society, or it means nothing at all. George Orwell, 1938.
By 1991, the wall had fallen, the Ceausescus were shot, something happened in Tiananmen Square, Nelson Mandela became a liberal, and the Soviet Union, the birthplace of global communism, had died. The remaining communist nations were embracing a market economy like China and Vietnam, flailing in the face of an economic embargo like Cuba, or slowly devolving into a nationalist fervor like North Korea or Yugoslavia. With all this collapse fresh in people's minds, it was a bad time to be a socialist. Liberal academia had settled on embracing a mindset best characterized by Francis Fukuyama when he said,
"What we may be witnessing is not just the end of the Cold War, or the passing of a particular period of post-war history, but the end of history as such. That is, the end point of mankind's ideological evolution and the universalization of Western liberal democracy as the final form of human government."
But the world order still had plenty of people ripe for rebellion. Anti-war sentiment returned with the start of the Gulf War against Iraq. Later, in the early 90s, institutional racism showed its everlasting presence in American politics again. A young black man in Los Angeles named Rodney King was horrifically beaten by white cops after a drunk driving incident. The arresting officers were charged with the use of excessive force and just a year later acquitted. The cops being white and King being black, this miscarriage of justice radicalized numerous Americans fed up with the racial injustice still lingering nationwide.
There was a feeling that there was a change that was going to come, that the Reagan-Bush years were over and now something different was going to happen. And I remember watching the first black president be inaugurated, Bill Clinton, and literally like weeping. I was crying tears of joy watching that man be sworn into office because I believed that this was an omen of profound changes that were about to take place, that were desperately necessary. And they didn't take place.
But there was a specific demographic much more conducive to seeing the world as wrong and needing change. Young people. As the 90s progressed, people's memories of the early Russian Revolution died, while Stalinism remained thoroughly discredited in people's minds. The ISO, being an anti-USSR but pro-Lenin and Trotsky, had a unique, radical niche to fill. Having no affiliation with a foreign country, they managed to avoid the strain of being seen.
Did you guys hear that? So the ISO did not like Stalin, was not pro-USSR, was pro-Lenin and pro-Trotsky. This is why the majority of far left socialist activists that we run into in the United States, they are Marxists, Leninists who believe that Trotsky was the proper inheritor of Lenin, not Stalin, who screwed everything up. And Mao, of course, is in the tradition of Stalin. So when you hear people like James Lindsay running around saying what we're experiencing in the United States is Maoism with American characteristics, it's just completely wrong. It's completely wrong. It's not to say there aren't Maoists in the United States. There are Maoists. I'm starting to become convinced that the Party of Socialism and Liberation might actually have funding ties to China. Maybe. I'm not 100% of the way there, but I'm part of the way there. So we can put them on the list of potentially this could be actually something that is legitimate. But most of the activists that we look into are Marxist-Leninists and are anti-Stalin and anti-Mao.
As assets of the KGB or prone to FBI infiltration. This made them a palatable sell on most college campuses, which is where the ISO gained most of its recruits.
This work in particular was a priority for the ISO. It were the kind of the main centers of radicalization in larger society and places where sustained organization and infrastructure was possible. And that's very important about the left.
Growth was the main strategy of the ISO, finding ways to get the attention of students and the public. One of these methods was selling a member-written monthly newspaper called Socialist Worker. It was sold wherever they could manage. The goal of these paper sales was getting students involved and packing them into weekly meetings or monthly lectures.
Yep.
These ISO chapters would cheap out and leech off of student club statuses for access to meeting spaces on college campuses. They would also attend every single demonstration they could to agitate for their politics, and utilize them as a vector for more newspaper sales. This was a way to keep recruits busy and an easy way to gain political influence amongst other activists.
Stumbled upon a mass demonstration of people out in the main square of the campus that then took over the building, swept through like a human ocean, like a tsunami, and I was swept along with it. Like, what are we doing? And we swept through, and we kicked everybody out of every single nook and cranny, every single office, spray painted our demands for minority admission onto giant banners and hung them from the windows so the whole campus could see. And then we had a mass meeting where the board of directors meet, and it's like all these old white men's faces, all the board of, are up on the wall, and we're standing up on tables and making speeches, and I'm just like, I'm late for band practice. This is amazing. Later on, I met these people who had been very involved in all of this from the International Socialist Organization. And, they were like, things are going to change. People are going to fight back. This is like, that's what it's all about. It's people banding together, fighting back, and having argued and argued and argued from my gut, and then feeling the confidence that I felt from being in that kind of protest movement. Everything they said just made so much sense to me. And I want to give you a picture of the group that I joined. It was a very serious group. These people were no joke, and to be honest, I thought they were a little bit crazy, but I also was impressed with their seriousness. Like, these were the people you went to if you had a question about anything, because they were so knowledgeable. And so right from the beginning when I joined, it was like so much reading to do. They were like, now you must read this. I was like, I haven't finished that. They were so serious. The other thing that attracted to me, though, was that they were not. They took their project and their ideas so seriously. They would, leave class and go to protests, and they were involved in things that were not just the campus issues, which was my starting point, like the campus issues and some sense of things going on in the world. But they were involved in labor disputes. They were involved in police brutality campaigns. They were involved in community struggles and in campus struggles.
This hyperactivism of the ISO would start to pay off in 1999. During the protests against the World Trade Organization in Seattle, Washington. Dubbed the Battle for Seattle, thousands of activists in favor of a wide variety of left-wing causes marched as the WTO held a meeting in the city. Politics ranging from environmentalists to anarchists, some of the radicals actively worked to disrupt the conference, pushing the WTO to end their business early. The protests soon turned to riots and ushered in a warning to the incoming 2000s. The left hadn't disappeared.
One of the things that I want people to notice as we make our way through this documentary, and this is actually really helpful in terms of like understanding the milestones of the development of modern socialist activists in the United States, is every single time there is a significant protest, every single time, it is always and universally organized by the radical, revolutionary, far left. It might be framed in the media as Democrats or progressives or liberals or whatever, and conservative media is going to show all their best videos of like liberals screaming and acting crazy to own the libs and dunk on the libs and feel morally superior. But that's not who's actually organizing the protests. That's not who's actually doing the work of the logistical work of getting people to show up, getting people involved, creating these things for people to be a part of. I mean, listen, you don't have to agree with their politics to admit that they created a social circle for people to be a part of, that people wanted to participate in, that was fun to be a part of, that was like, it was like a club. That's what we need to create on our side. That's why, that's part of the reason I called this show The Cult. It was to mock this idea. Like, yeah, of course we have a cult. We have an anti-communist cult. We have a cult of people who get together, who hang out, who like to have fun, who like to learn about this stuff. We like doing deep dives into this information, and we like doing things in the real world to push back against this. Like, we are a social system that people can come in and be a part of if they fit in, because not everyone's going to fit in, but if they do, like, they can have fun here. They can relax here. They don't have to put up with internet bullshit and nonsense and drama and all that. We're trying to literally do a monkey see, monkey do on what they did in a little bit of like a satirical way where I'm kind of making it seem very socialist, but in fact it's like anti-socialist and anti-communist because people like that sort of thing. It's like dry humor. It's satire. We are satiring the socialists. That's part of the way you fight people, guys, is with humor. And with mockery. You take people's power away. Like, one of the reasons James Lindsay is wilting and dying on the vine right now on Twitter is because in mocking him, we've taken away his power and now he looks crazy. And he can look crazy. And that's okay. And, well, yeah, but the thing, the secret is that most people will never listen to what I'm saying. They'll just be pissed off. So I'm explaining the joke, and the people who get the joke can come and be a part of it. The people that don't get it can and cry on the internet, and that's okay. They're allowed to do that. But we have to find our people. We have to find our people that understand this, and if people don't want to be a part of it or they want to cause problems, that's fine too.
2000s opened up to the controversial Gore-Bush presidential election, shaking some people's faith in the electoral system entirely. 2001 would add further shocks as terrorists hijacked airliners full of passengers and struck the World Trade Center in the 9/11 attacks, killing thousands. In response, Republican President George W. Bush declared war on Afghanistan, the country harboring the group behind the attacks, an Islamic fundamentalist group called Al-Qaeda. Now, some radical groups protested the war, which was a rather unpopular move, but not entirely without some sort of logic behind it. Fervor of the American public allowed interests within the government to utilize the crisis to expand the war powers of the president. Many, including elected officials, warned that it would easily be open to abuse. 2 years later, they would be proven right with the second invasion of Iraq and the quick revelation that the US invaded under false pretenses. This unfathomable waste of money and human life angered people from all walks of life, creating a new and engaged anti-war movement in the US. By then, the ISO would reach its peak of about 1,200 members.
It was a big, I think, turning point around the invasion of Iraq and the movement against the war that I think throughout the 2000s, anti-war and anti-imperialist organizing was kind of the dominant organizing that most ISO members did. The struggle erupted again around the invasion of Iraq, and in particular for younger members.
The ISO would also gain traction in the Chicago Teachers Union, with Jesse Sharkey, a future CTU president, being a member and speaking at ISO events, though he was more notably present in the 2010s. The CTU would become a focal point of ISO organizing, with many ISO members being in the caucus of rank-and-file educators.
The Chicago Teachers Union was run by the International Socialist Organization. That makes a ton of sense. Andre, thank you for the very good information that every time it's the socialists that are organizing the leftist protests, especially the humor and comedy part. Hey, thank you. I appreciate that. Thanks for the super chat. Bro, like, you and I are about to have a come to Jesus. Because either you're going to cut this shit out or you're going to go. You can decide. But I've had it. I really have. I've had it. Either you are going to assimilate to the norms of my cult, or you're going to be removed, bro. I know you came in here through the disenraged stuff, and that's fine. But if this is how you're going to play this, and the constant shit posting in the chat, and the stuff about your personal life that, quite frankly, I don't really care about, I have given you more than enough chances. You're going to cut the shit.
Educators, or CORE, some of whom also gave talks at ISO-sponsored events. One of the ISO's biggest accomplishments was a group that they helped run called the Campaign to End the Death Penalty. The group worked tirelessly to fight against death penalty cases across the country, arguing the punishment not only did not match the crime, but was cruel, unusual, and rife with abuse. CEDP was a big part of pressuring the Illinois government to abolish the death penalty. It all came to a head when Republican Governor George Ryan put a moratorium on all death penalty cases, and even granted clemency to those on death row. For the death penalty abolitionists, this was a huge victory, which the ISO made a healthy contribution to. National Coordinator Marlene Martin led talks on the issue, which featured a coalition of activists, not just ISO members. With this rapid growth, the organization had to devolve some of the responsibilities out of the steering committee's hands. Locals would be called branches, and they would have their own leadership committee, which would only be beholden to steering. If there were many branches, such as in Chicago, which often had one per campus or in a particular neighborhood, these would be put under a district of branches with a district organizer appointed by the steering committee. Members were referred to as cadre, an old term for hardline party activists from the Bolsheviks in Russia. However, this decade wasn't free of challenges. This hyperactivism wasn't always so smooth, and eventually created cause for federal intervention. According to FBI documents released under the Freedom of Information Act, the Bureau began to investigate the ISO Austin branch in the mid-2000s, out of fear that they would agitate riots. This unwanted attention was due to ISO participation in a riot in Toledo, which occurred in 2005 and was caused by an anti-Nazi protest that had devolved into violence between the Nazis, protesters, and the police. Now, it's unclear if this led to any actual arrests, but FBI informants and observers noticed that certain members were escalating anti-war rallies. Part of the file, though, is just the FBI agents noting that the ISO chapter wasn't showing up to its own meetings. The other big shock in the early 2000s was shortly after the death of Tony Cliff, the leader and main theorist of the International Socialist Tendency umbrella organization. Leadership in the Socialist Workers' Party of the United Kingdom began to publish open criticisms of the ISO's politics and strategies. The argument appears to involve differences in political strategy, such as a claim that the ISO was seen as not supporting the struggle in Seattle during the WTO protests. The SWP also accused them of attempting to foment a split within a sister organization in Greece.
Had joined swimming with thousands of other people. They just had a whole different process, and they were becoming cadres so quickly. It was an amazing thing to see. So during the convention, they're standing up, they're speaking from their union, they're speaking from their campus, they're speaking from their community center that they fought and defended. They're speaking, telling all these amazing stories. And somebody throws out a question that, that we're having this perspective debate with the British Socialist Workers' Party. And somebody uses Trotsky's analogy where he says, look, and it's important for socialists, if you think of the revolution as a pregnancy, to understand, are we in the first month of the pregnancy or are we in the 9th month? Like, where are we in this process, right? And so people are talking about, like, we think actually the ISO's perspective at the time was we're fairly early in this pregnancy process. And, we're trying to be sober about this. We're excited, great things are happening, but, let's be sober. Kalinico stands up and says, comrades, the point here is not whether this is the first month of pregnancy or the 9th, but whether there's a pregnancy at all, which you don't seem to grasp. And literally, I fell out of my chair. I was like, wait, what? Like, you don't, what? Like, I just didn't understand how somebody could listen to that room and not understand. And you have to understand that for me, Alex Kalinikos was like, this was one of my intellectual heroes.
The ISO naturally repudiated this, and the SWP cut all ties in March of 2001. Then the SWP unilaterally kicked them out from the International Socialist Tendency. Despite being supposedly international, the ISO took its sudden domestic isolation in stride.
Long story short, we were expelled from... We were expelled from an international grouping called the International Socialist Tendency, which they ran, basically. And if you dissented from them in any way, in fact, another international guest told me privately at the bar that he agreed with me. He's like, yeah, that was ridiculous what Kalinko said. I said, oh my God, you're not in the ISO, you're from another country. You should go and say that in the next meeting. Go back and say that. And he said, oh, no, I can't say that. No, I can't say that. Wow. So we're in some kind of a revolutionary operation where you can't say what you think and disagree with people? That's not, something's rotten here. So we were expelled, and the expulsion had an inadvertently positive effect, I think, on us, in that we were forced to think about many, many things for ourselves.
The loss of international support, the ISO turned to its own resources and created a publishing house called Haymarket Books.
Ding.
Publisher was run through a non-profit headed by Ahmed Shawki called the Center for Economic Research and Social Change, or CERSC. In addition to being a new home for the Socialist Worker newspaper, Haymarket would publish books from ISO theorists and leaders like Paul D'Amato, Sherry Wolf, and of course, Ahmed Shawki and his wife, Sharon Smith. At this time, CERSC relied on book sales and private donations. Starting in 2003, records show ISO steering committee member Joel Geyer donating between $5,000 and $15,000 for well over a decade, ending shortly before the group's collapse.
This is
Other notable
great.
donors include frequent ISO steering member Lance
This is great. We know where their funding is coming from. They're coming from personal fucking donations.
Selfa. At the time of his donation, future CTU president Jesse Sharkey. Sharkey would occasionally donate money as well. Soon, setting up tables of Haymarket merch became a mainstay of ISO membership, with volunteer members selling the books on campus during paper sales. All of the money went to CERSC, of which Sharkey was president. He was the only paid member on the board at around $40,000 a year, with about $10,000 in benefits. He was still considered the unofficial head of the steering committee at the ISO at the same time. Also on the board, on and off, was Sharon Smith, who doesn't appear to have collected a salary as an officer until the mid-2010s. Other members at various points under Shockey's tenure appeared to be ISO steering committee members, such as Lance Selfa and Paul D'Amato. Bill Roberts, another ISO steering member, and D'Amato appeared to briefly gain a salary around the time when Smith started to. In 2002, the ISO began hosting something called the Socialism Conference in Chicago. Previously, the ISO ran something similar called the Socialist Summer School. The conference was a convention with talks about various topics, ranging from history to politics, and even some live entertainment. Starting as a largely ISO-only event, it quickly became a left institution. Guests of note include...
Hang on, bro. Please. Please. Please don't. I think you're being in jest. What's that? Socialists are allowed to engage in capitalism? Yes. Yes, socialists are allowed to engage in capitalism. Yeah, they are. Yeah, they are. Because they're trying to overthrow it.
Journalist Glenn Greenwald, author Naomi Klein, and even Amy Goodman of Democracy Now! Despite the tizzy between the two groups, Alex Kalinikos, a leader in the British Socialist Workers' Party, and others in the SWP UK would even start to attend as special guests, giving talks on Marxism and history. Actor Wallace Shawn was even a guest speaker at one point. Throughout the decades, ISO members stood out for their militancy and loyalty to the socialist cause. Sometimes this worked in the group's favor, gaining the attention of major publications. In 2007, David Judd, leader of the Columbia University ISO group, was interviewed by The New Yorker, who did a feature on activism on the campus. This included Judd's disciplining by the university after an incident involving a conservative speaker. But it could also backfire. 5 years earlier, Columbia magazine, with a humorous bent and a right-wing political lean, called The Federalist, did an expose on the ISO. A former member who was interviewed described the group as
a cult. A total cult.
Leanne Aronchick joined in 1999 and described how the membership went from very welcoming, as she started to participate, to manipulative after she joined. She was badgered into becoming part of the group as she attended the meetings. After she joined, she was encouraged to contribute monthly dues, which were about $20, and an option to pay less. She was also asked to buy merchandise and sell the Socialist Worker newspaper. At one point, the topic of political violence was brought up, which Aronchick disagreed with vehemently. A member started to argue with her.
He wouldn't let go until I agreed. He would ask other people to join the argument on his side until I gave in. He said, I get the feeling you're not agreeing with us. You couldn't have a friendly argument.
Eventually, a non-student leader of the organization called her up and said that he sensed resistance in her over some of the ISO's more extremist political claims. This prompted her to finally leave.
It was really hard to leave. I feel guilty for leaving. But once I quit, it was like a 1,000-pound weight was lifted from my shoulders. They're always pressuring you. There's always another fight. If you have the slightest deviation of thought, they try to talk you out of it.
Elsewhere, other ex-members would write about their negative experiences. A notable one was by an activist by the name of John Lackney. He joined in 1997 as a college freshman in Pittsburgh. Lackney was deeply interested in local union work on campus, and the ISO was spearheading it. He already had a rather negative view of the group, but their ubiquity in every single activist struggle known to man made it impossible to not be involved. Lackney described the internal culture as petty, and the workload rather high. One of his sharpest criticisms was over the group's need to promote the newspaper.
One of the more surreal moments of my ISO experience surrounded the sale of Socialist Worker. At one cadre meeting, we were discussing the reluctance of branch members to sell it. As you can imagine, I was one of the worst offenders. I would carefully hide my copies of the paper under my petition in favor of the maintenance workers. After asking people to sign the petition, I would merely thank them, and they would generally be on their way. Rarely did I ever bother to make the pitch for the paper, and then only to placate a nearby ISO comrade. In any event, other members were somewhat reluctant as well. Speaking to this problem, one member had a bizarre piece of advice on how to overcome shyness. I've been reluctant to approach people too, but when I stopped to think about the fact that I'm willing to die for this,
Lackney would find his breaking point after a veteran member went against the group's line on an issue and was pushed to resign shortly after. He saw the writing on the wall, particularly after a different leader in the branch said after the veteran's ousting,
You know, I don't even care that much that we're only 5 members, because that way we'll be tight. We'll know what we're about, and we'll have our perspective right, because when the revolution comes, we're gonna have to kill people.
Lackney began to work with other members who saw the behavior rather bizarre and were more interested in activism than building socialism. They broke with the group, much to the chagrin of the rest of the branch. Most of these critiques were from the late 90s and early 2000s. It wasn't until the 2010s when the cracks would start to become prominent, but there would be one last hurrah with Occupy, which is when I came into the picture.
Part 2 is done. Now, this is a great documentary. I'm really enjoying this. Okay, so apparently there's no part 3, but there is a clip that says, "Where is part 3?" So let's check in. What happened to part 3? See, music is punk. Of course it's punk. They're ruining punk for me. Come on.
So right now you're naturally asking, where is episode 3? Well, I've decided to put it behind my Patreon. Naturally, as such a small channel and the fact that this is right in the middle of a series, you're probably scratching your heads at this decision. So, allow me to explain myself real quick. So for starters, episode 3 is a retelling of my experiences when I was in the ISO. I planned to release it at the same time or shortly before episode 4, as it really isn't too narratively important. Because it's so personal, I didn't bother to re-record it from the initial version of this series, and, well, the audio quality is quite bad. Just laying it out there that way. It would be really jarring, I feel, for you, the audience, to have such a low-quality video out of the blue. Ignoring that aspect, it's also very personal and frankly embarrassing. So I honestly looked for an excuse to not release it publicly. But here's the main reason. At the end of June, I was laid off from my job. Currently, I am barely scraping by, making most of my bills just by a thread, working part-time in a grocery store. I am stuck at 20 hours a week, and I am desperately looking for better work. I can't fully rely on family for help, and well, it just made sense to try and monetize this series to the best of my ability. As of this recording, the US job market is a total mess, and being a transgender woman doesn't help. I need help, and I need to do what I have to do. As such, I found that this episode would just be the natural one to paywall. It's the least intrusive to the overall narrative, I have some personal reasons, and I think if you're curious enough, you'll want to shell out the $20 to go watch it. So if you want to hear my ramblings, head over and join at the $20 tier. But why else would you want to join?
Fair enough. I'm not gonna disrupt the Patreon. Fair enough. Let's move on to episode 4. Yep, trans woman. Very nice trans woman, I'm sure.
Content warning. This series deals with the topic of sexual assault. Viewer discretion is advised.
There is strong pressure on any Trotskyist, or quasi-Trotskyist leader to go for broke when they reach 50 years of age. There is the knowledge that they are in the tradition of Lenin, who led the Bolshevik Revolution when he too was in his 50s. The idea that they might let this opportunity escape them is almost too horrible to imagine, so they take all sorts of gambles. Such pressures must have weighed on David Koresh, who, like Jesus, was in his early 30s when the Waco confrontation developed. Louis Project, 1998.
While the Occupy movement proved to be a peak for recruitment, the 2010s would quickly get rocky, returning to a trend that was quietly building as early as 2007. Behind the scenes, the ISO's campus focus was alienating the older members. For those who joined in the 80s, many of these people were now in their early to mid-40s. Some of them had children or day jobs and couldn't find the time to staff book sales and maintain a healthy personal life. So some people started to leave the organization entirely. 7 of these departees eventually spoke to one another and realized that they all had similar experiences. They then penned an open letter and a blog called Socialist Outpost. Before publishing it, one of the authors, Saman Separi, claims that he informed Ahmed Shawki about his concerns and that a blog would be going up discussing them. It gained traction in the early Facebook age, spreading like wildfire amongst left-leaning blogs, forums, and chat rooms. Everyone in the ISO or adjacent to it was aware of this website. Elsewhere, similar articles started popping up, often with similar experiences. In response, 2 members of the ISO penned a letter condemning the Socialist Outpost writers for criticizing the group from the outside. A week later, Socialist Worker editor Alan Mass and ISO member Eric Ruder wrote a more in-depth critique following.
This was in 2013, okay? So this is relatively recent. We're talking about a little over 10 years ago.
This, the Outpost bloggers each wrote about their individual experiences and why they left. One of these was Adam Turrell, who was the district organizer of the group in Chicago and felt that Sharon Smith of the steering committee had pushed him to make odd decisions in rallying the group's activist efforts. Saman Separi, who was a senior member of the ISO, and his wife Sophie, wrote that they were excluded over what they felt was Sharon Smith playing personality politics. He claimed that Smith and Shawki had fostered a culture where personality trumped political realities, a project.
Isn't there something comforting about the fact that in some respects the far left is just as dysfunctional as the conservative right? And it actually makes it even more impressive that the far left is winning so aggressively, right? Because they have all the same infighting problems. These infighting problems are like no different than what we experience with Conservative Inc. and all their bullshit. It's like they're just people too. The difference between the left and the right, though, is that even as they're doing bullshit and infighting, they're still out there pushing their agenda. They're still writing books. They're still recruiting on college campuses. They're still organizing. They're still doing all that stuff. And they're doing it in the midst of infighting and bullshit. Whereas the right just focuses on infighting and bullshit and not actually doing what's required to push the agenda forward, with the exception of Scott Pressler, who is the only activist that exists on the right.
Would just be cancelled just because someone didn't like someone else. Separi's doubts with the organization started slowly, but they built up exponentially. The first was a failed experiment, as he called it, pushed at the behest of Sharon Smith in 2006. Smith apparently said that the steering committee wanted to use older members to build a branch in a strategic neighborhood in Chicago, which was Logan Square. The issue was that most of these members didn't live in the neighborhood and had no experience with the local issues. It was an unmitigated disaster and pulled away many resources from the group. So, Ahmed and Sharon started to push a tried and true approach, build up campus branches. This frustrated both Saman and Sophie.
And so suddenly we went from reading, writing articles, and engaging with comrades on the international left, to figuring out which gray-haired 40-something was going to drive 35 miles to a community college to staff a lit table in the middle of a workday. Sophie wanted no part of it. She already commutes 35 miles out to a college every day.
The couple had other specialties. Sophie was deeply focused on work for single-payer healthcare, something she was pulled away from to focus on the failed branch experiment. As an Iranian, Saman was deeply focused on solidarity work with the dissidents amid the Green Revolution protest movement, which was ongoing in Iran at the time. He even traveled to Tehran and had an eyewitness account of the situation on
Yeah, so Rusty asks, what's going on in Chicago? So many people are from there. Chicago is the home base of these people. It's the home base of Haymarket Books. It was the home base of the International Socialist Organization. If you remember back to the 1968 DNC convention, where which was in Chicago, which is where you had all of these like leftist riots and takeovers and all that stuff. Chicago is like the epicenter
of socialist activism. So people think that it's places like Portland and Seattle and like New York or things like that. And there is a lot of activism there. There's activism that exists to a lesser extent in California, but like Chicago is like the queen bee mecca, just because a lot of these organizations have sprung up there, and it's been that way for decades and decades and decades and decades.
On the ground. His work on the subject was reportedly discouraged. By the time of the ISO convention in 2009, he was openly discussing their issues with other activists, which then led to a confrontation with Sharon Smith.
On Sunday, prior to leaving the convention in between two sessions, we approached Sharon simply to say goodbye. We were met with vitriol. Right there on the floor of the convention, in front of other comrades, Sharon berated us, called us poison and miserable. A tactic of making us toxic in front of other comrades, so that no one would talk to us. The pretext was discussions we had had with others, discussions at which she had not been present, but any excuse would have sufficed. True to form, Sharon had once again heard something from a close associate and decided to react imperiously. Sophie tried to defuse the situation, but was treated with more rage and rancor as a response. We left the convention, perplexed, upset, and angry.
Days later, Saman found a voicemail from an ISO functionary, claiming that Sophie was no longer a member. The two eventually met with steering committee members Sean Harkin and Paul D'Amato, who informed them that it was less that she was kicked out, but a request from Smith for a cooling off period. Both were banned from ISO branch meetings. Saman accepted the terms. Sophie objected. Weeks passed, and there was no indication that they would be allowed back. Then months passed, and after years of email correspondence, they gave up on ever trying to participate again. Meanwhile, a university professor, Loretta Capehart, was sponsoring the ISO club on the campus of Northeastern University. She said that leadership abandoned her while she attempted to save the campus group. Apparently, the group had been accused of violence and harassment. There apparently had been a confrontation during an anti-war protest. She claims that she risked her job to support the students, while she claimed that the ISO did nothing. Later, Capehart entered a
Hey, Daniel, I just want to say thank you for all the great posting you've been doing over on X. I have been seeing it. I haven't necessarily responded to all of it, but I have been seeing it, and I really do appreciate it, bro. Thank you.
years-long legal battle with the university, in which she claimed that she was passed up on promotions due to her advocacy. She eventually settled with NEIU for an undisclosed sum. Capehart and her partner Ramon left after this debacle. Adam Turrell left in 2011. Content warning: sexual assault. A crisis is brewing elsewhere on the left in 2013. The Socialist Workers' Party over in the UK had been accused of covering up a rape perpetrated by a senior member. The scandal rocked the organization all year, leading to many student wings leaving, articles in British newspapers, and outright ridicule from all sectors of the English-speaking left worldwide. The blog and the crisis in the SWP proved to be a catalyst for a contested ISO leadership election, the first one since 1983. For the 2014 convention, about a dozen members, mostly from East Coast branches, established what was known as the Renewal Faction, which was a group that offered an opposing slate to the largely Chicago-based Smith and Shockey clique, who had governed the group for nearly 30 years at this point. Formed shortly after the publication of the Outpost letter, the faction was mostly inspired by a member by the name of Sean Joseph. Joseph got into a disagreement with members in the Boston chapter, but decided to leave the ISO until he decided to then just rejoin through the Cambridge branch. Members there had tried to petition for his reinstatement, despite having voluntarily left the Boston chapter. Joseph was barred from rejoining at the behest of the steering committee, who wanted Boston's leadership to weigh in and if he was worthy of coming back into the fold. The group promised to change the organization's direction and offer a better approach. They also openly questioned the role of Sirsk in the group's activities. In one blog
Do you know what we have to do at some point? We have to go back and retake that 3-part class on how to be a good comrade. Was anyone around for that? Do people remember the comrade class? I think this was actually like very early on in Socialism Saturday, where we actually found a 3-part class on the history of comradeship, what it means to be a comrade, how people are disciplined when they're comrades, the standard of behavior that you have to meet in order to be considered a comrade in good standing. Like, I think we should take that again. I think we've learned a lot since we took that, and I just think it would actually be really entertaining for us to do it again sometime, maybe.
post, they brought attention to how Ahmed was employed by CERSC and how its board of directors were nearly all members of the steering committee of the ISO.
And not
This was
everyone
met
has
with
seen it.
firm opposition from many members of the ISO, and an all-out verbal assault was set off within the convention's bulletins, a blog run by the faction, and even Facebook. At one point, Renewal Faction member Vanessa Beck got into a Facebook argument with Kianga Yamada Taylor, a progressive scholar who was on the ISO steering committee.
I know
Beck made a
that.
snarky reply on Taylor's Facebook wall over a post about race relations. So for
I'm almost positive that person has been doing presentations with Haymarket Books lately under like Black Lives Matter. Almost positive.
context, for a very long time, the ISO claimed that white people didn't benefit from racism, among other criticisms of identity politics. This line seems to have prompted the reply from Beck, who's already on poor terms with Taylor after a previously heated argument back in 2008. Beck accused her of being unprofessional as a leader of the group. Taylor, frustrated with the back and forth, said,
"I'm just not who you think I am. I don't really care what you are a member of other than the trifling ass bullshit committee. Now go write an open letter about how I said mean things."
Shortly after, Beck was expelled from the organization after Taylor informed Ahmed Shawki of Beck's minimal or skipped due payments. Beck claims to have been on disability and had a limited income, largely coming from government assistance. She states that her and Ahmed, who is also treasurer of the ISO, had an agreement where she could pay less. Shawki claimed her recently recorded $6 cash payment was far below the accepted $20 minimum, and that she needed to provide records of all of her prior payments. Problem was, these were all in cash and likely unrecorded. This series of online back and forths would continue until something happened that would horrify the entire left. Content warning: sexual assault. It had come to light that the ISO's then leadership had mishandled a sexual assault allegation. In the ISO's pre-convention bulletin number 19, dated February 5th, 2014, Section 2 of the document discusses an alleged sexual misconduct incident in San Diego, sometimes referred to as Xville to keep the situation under wraps. Chuck Stemke, better known as Comrade Daniel, was accused of sexually assaulting a member. Stemke had just been published in Socialist Worker criticizing sexual harassment over in a municipal government. Upon reading this article, this angered a member of the Party of Socialism and Liberation, a rival group with a Marxist-Leninist, quasi-Stalinist political orientation. She personally knew the victim and was aware of these allegations. This PSL affiliate then accused the ISO's leadership of a cover-up. As the branch at large became aware, the details began to pour in.
It became clear during that meeting that the incident had occurred a year prior in July 2012, and that at least some members of the branch had been aware through accusations made by people close to the victim, but not the victim herself, or by rumor. In 2012, no formal investigation had been made. By the end of the meeting in July 2013, an investigation committee was formed, and the committee members were chosen based on the comfort of the victim, the objectivity of the members regarding the accused, and the knowledge and training of members in intimate violence and gender depression.
As the investigation proceeded, it was discovered that members of the San Diego Branch Committee and some steering committee members were aware of the allegations. Steering had declared it a local matter and that it could not be discussed with outsiders. This apparently had created a rift in the branch, and members of the San Diego ISO branch became disillusioned with the whole process. Stemke then resigned. Along with this document detailing the debacle, San Diego branch writ large included a proposal to reform the internal grievance policy. Shortly after it was released, someone leaked the PDF of the bulletin online, and it became widely accessible on the blog The Charnel House. Bulletin number 19, and eventually a trove of other internal convention bulletins as far back as 2010, were sent to the blog's owner, Ross Wolf. Now, I was one of the individuals who submitted documents, all of which were from the 2012 convention. I do not know who the other leakers were. The leaks, strangely enough, became a bit of a controversy amongst the internet left. Some individuals got rather militant about secrecy culture. Others highlighted that the ISO's leadership had possibly covered up a sexual assault case, and then slept on it for over a year. Great Moments in Leftism, a webcomic popular amongst dissident leftists at the time, lampooned it. According to Wolf, one disgruntled member posted the following online.
So this is how the ISO steering committee works, I guess. If someone sends angry emails to an important Lenin scholar, start getting involved later that day. If someone's critical of the leadership and is late paying dues, or hasn't paid enough, send an email saying he or she isn't a member anymore. If a member rapes someone, don't do anything for over a year. Hide this from most members of the branch in question, and take it to the disciplinary committee only after the rest of the branch finds out accidentally.
Wow.
If someone leaks documents showing that the steering committee covered up the above-mentioned rape to bad socialists like Ross Wolf, make snarky Facebook comments attacking the offending member for being disloyal. Maybe they were just having another 3 margarita meeting.
I want a
The Renewal faction then released its own statement on its own blog, harshly criticizing the leadership for acting so slowly on the allegations. Eventually, they too slowly began releasing their own separate convention bulletin documents as well, after their submissions were blocked from the internal convention bulletin. This led to accusations and name-calling on both sides. The steering committee and the Loyalists began to denounce Renewal members on Facebook or posted in solidarity with the steering committee. This tense atmosphere was at a fever pitch, and when it finally came time for the convention, it finally blew up. According to an article by ex-ISO member Brandy Baker for the ISO critical blog North Star, the delegates were charged for any paperwork for the convention. These were things like the rules of decorum or the docket and schedule. Compared to other years, a rule was added about keeping all proceedings secret. Renewal members had a very icy reception, with Loyalist members reportedly hovering over them behind their backs, which Baker postulates was in hopes of catching them leaking more documents. Much of the Loyalist faction claimed that the ISO Renewal members were agents of the American government, coming to crush the group. Prominent ISO member Joe Allen is reported to have said at the event,
"We knew when we live-streamed Glenn Greenwald we would be targeted by the state, and this is what it looks like."
Ahmed Shawky and some Loyalist members continued the tirades against the faction, with Shawky supposedly claiming, "There is no need for factions in the ISO. Factions always end up poorly. Like this instance." One of the few members of the faction to speak was reportedly shaken by the barrage from Shawky and others. It is claimed that he was hissed and booed at by others in attendance. Sharon Smith then made her statement against the group. Baker describes the incident as follows.
Renewal were scolded by Sharon Smith, the ISO national organizer, for daring to demand that the steering committee be held to account for its mistakes in the Daniel Chuck case, and for trying to make the steering committee name the specific SC members who automatically disbelieved the complaint and refused to act on it. In corporate America, a bunglering of a sexual assault case this severe would result in the termination of any supervisors or HR managers on whose watches this occurred. In the ISO, demanding to know who specifically on the steering committee was involved in the Comrade Daniel Chuck case and now gets you a slew of verbal assaults and a one-way ticket out of the organization. Are ISO loyalists really this stupid?
Then another member of the Renewal faction spoke in defense of their faction statements. He then reiterated the reality of the mishandling of the San Diego case by the ISO leadership. He was reportedly met with heavy boos and jeers and continued hissing. Now, as the 10 minutes hate continued, the following resolution was proposed and then passed.
There has been a shift by the Renewal faction as a result of not finding significant political support for their initial perspective in the ISO towards more destructive actions that put the organization at risk. These include, but are not limited to, the external bulletin post on CIRSC, which puts the nonprofit at financial risk and makes individuals named vulnerable, the snitch jacketing of a comrade and defense of this by the faction, the external bulletin post declaring that the faction will no longer redact internal documents from its website, even without permission from our organization or individual members, which in practice has already censored comrades from making important contributions to the convention. The external bulletin post that slanderously accuses the ISO Steering Committee, SC, of instinctively disbelieving a woman who brought a sexual assault complaint and reflecting the sexist and patriarchal logic of capitalist society based on a misrepresentation of pre-convention bulletin number 19 without notifying the author.
They actually said that covering up the sexual assault was the reflection of the sexist and patriarchal logic of capitalist society. This is the most socialist thing that's ever happened, ever. It's not just that you covered up a sexual assault, okay? It's that your actions reflected capitalist society. You fucking capitalist.
You know what? For socialists, the term capitalist is like, it's kind of like it's like the Jews. Both literally and figuratively, it's like the Jews. It's like, you know how there are some people, and obviously I'm not one of those people, but there are some people on the internet that blame the Jews for everything, and every time someone says or does something messed up, they get called Jewish. It's exactly the same thing. Both literally and figuratively.
We feel that we can no longer operate on grounds of mutual trust in an organization where this behavior is allowed. We call on the convention, our highest decision-making body, to vote on the following. We call on all Renewal Faction members to retract support for the aforementioned actions in writing to the SC, and by removing all materials from their website or face disciplinary action, including expulsion, as deemed necessary by the SC immediately following convention. We call on all Renewal Faction delegates and guests to retract their support for the aforementioned actions in writing to the SC in order to be readmitted to convention on Sunday morning. Aaron P., Detroit. Elizabeth W.F., Madison. Aaron A., Jason F., Jonah B., Leah P., New York City. Brian K., Poughkeepsie.
Shortly after, the group was ejected from the convention. That Sunday, the Loyalists held a disciplinary committee meeting. By Monday, all Renewal members were expelled from the ISO. In the aftermath, several ISO branches formally left the ISO, becoming independent socialist groups with similar politics. Among these was the ISO Brown University branch, the one that Shockey was in when he moved to the US and was a foundational part of the organization. Strangely enough, there was also a brief Wikipedia edit war on the ISO's wiki page, where an account sharing the name of steering committee member and SW reporter Nicole Colson, tried to remove mentions of renewal, citing Wikipedia policy. So the years passed and people forgot. After a brief confrontation I had with the group in 2015, I moved on with my life and didn't think about the ISO for years, focusing on my career. That is, until the year 2019, the year that the ISO disbanded.
Ooh. All right. So now we're up to 2019. All right, that was episode 4, right? So now we're going into the cult cover-up is real. Or the cult cover-up.
Content warning.
One.
This series deals with the topic of sexual assault. Viewer discretion is advised.
Nevertheless, I can't help but mention that I was much more annoyed at those who sympathized with the workers, yet would not help due to personal distaste for the ISO. And I know that there were at least 10 of these for every one of us that stuck with it. At colleges across the country, it is people like this who allow the ISO to pass itself off as the exclusive voice of the left, and thereby to stunt the growth of the campus left in general. So long as these individuals stay silent, the ISO will always have recourse to its most powerful weapon. The question, what are you doing? What the ISO is doing is not constructive, for all their presentations about building a movement. But they're doing something, and until the rest of the left gets off of its collective ass and does something real, it will have no right to scorn groups like the ISO. John Lackney, 2000.
2014 was more than just a difficult year for the ISO. The foundational branch departing and the San Diego sexual assault controversy being well known amongst socialist activists at the time, it was very difficult to navigate the activist scene. Socialist worker readership dropped substantially, and it looked like the 30 years of work to build the ISO had been undone in a single year. The next blow would be in 2015, with the announcement of Bernie Sanders' run for the presidency. As a self-proclaimed democratic socialist, suddenly young left-leaning activists started to join the Democratic Socialists of America, or DSA. Ironically, DSA also emerged from the slow demise of the aforementioned Socialist Party of America, much like the ISO. They weren't on anybody's radar, as they were a much more moderate group that focused mostly on electoral politics and electoral activism. As such, they they didn't have the same paranoid culture as the ISO, a culture in which infiltration and potential arrest were constant fears. And now they had brand recognition. Shortly after Sanders' loss and Donald Trump's victory over Hillary Clinton, DSA membership surged while ISO membership steadily declined. In late 2018, they would boast about 900 members from the 1,200 at their peak. By 2019, the ISO's membership nearly halved from there.
And as much as it pains me to say this, we are going to have to start paying more attention to the DSA in the next 4 years, because that to me seems like the most logical stop for people who are disaffected with the Democratic Party. They're probably not going to go full on socialist right away. They're going to kind of like meander their way over there. And so sadly, we do have to start paying attention to the DSA, because the DSA usually isn't that entertaining, but sometimes they can be entertaining. But we need to know what they're doing, because no one else on the internet is doing this shit except for me, and I get attacked for it because I never get anything I want and everyone sucks and no one cares about the truth. But we care about the truth even when it sucks.
Down to about 500. DSA, meanwhile, had a membership in the tens of thousands. The ISO's extremist political lines, such as knee-jerk opposition to the Democrats and their old anti-identity politics stances, started to receive even stronger challenges both internally and externally. With the rise of DSA, their more moderate approach had proven successes, with the election of people like Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. Content warning: sexual assault. The ISO, meanwhile, would have a second set of sexual assault allegations, this time in the Portland, Oregon branch. In 2017, 3 women had accused an individual by the name of Weil E. of assaulting them in a series of incidents that had began as early as 2014. In a pre-convention bulletin from 2019, some members, along with Weil, alleged that Todd Sheridan and Sharon Smith had intervened in what was an internal affair and made a mess of the proceedings. They added that Weil's due process had been violated.
At the height of hostility in December 2017, Sharon S. came to Portland to attend 2 members-only meetings. In the exact moment when national leaders were needed to mediate the crisis, Sharon exacerbated the fracturing within the branch. She stated at the second of these 2 meetings that the branch's problem was too many people talking shit about each other. She then proceeded to talk shit about one of the comrades who had been in the 3-person BC relationship. Sharon disclosed a personal concern that had been shared with her in private conversation. Instead of addressing any questions with this comrade directly, Sharon disclosed this concern to the entire branch as part of an attack on the character and the intentions of this comrade. Sharon's conduct not only gave the green light to continue using personal attacks in lieu of political debate, but it would lay the foundation for replacing due process with one's perceptions of the other comrade's intentions.
However, as these allegations of a mishandling were partially signed by Weil, this led to a brief but passionate rebuttal from the victims.
Looking at the list of authors, we see people who adamantly disregarded our wishes, refused to engage in trauma-informed mediation, protected our abuser, and are unapologetic to this day. That we have not filed a complaint against every one of them is described as a failure of due process. The complaint process takes multiple months, requires the accusers to relive traumatic events, and potentially interact with the complainant further. After several complaints, which resulted in expulsions, we were completely drained, and decided to not file any additional complaints.
Branch Committee also submitted a statement defending Sheridan Todd, stating,
"We stand by Sharon S. and Todd C. and remain indebted to them for the support they gave to the Portland branch throughout the crisis. They helped us to shine light on what had been in the shadows in Portland."
By 2018, it was clear to most members that a shakeup was needed. Shockey and Smith were getting into their 60s and had been in leadership since 1983. Many of the younger Gen X and Millennial members were starting to get older and just as antsy as some of the founding members who had left in the 2000s. The bulletin for the 2019 convention mentions myriad issues, ranging from constant member burnout, mass resignations from certain branches, and a clear demand for internal reform. There would be another contested ISO election, and it wasn't just a single opposition faction. This time, there were many. The steering committee split between a majority faction, led by Alan Mass and Jill Geyer, against a minority faction with Ahmed Shockey, Sharon Smith, Lisa Starr, Lance Selfa, and Paul D'Amato, amongst others. The majority promised mass reform within the group, changing some of the ISO's long-held lines against working with the Democrats, and even suggesting decreasing member workload to prevent burnout to improve member retention. The minority faction, meanwhile, promised to stay the course and keep the organization largely the same, with some minor tweaks. Other factions popped up as well, one called Socialist Socialist Tide Revolutionary Current, as well as another called Independence and Struggle. Both promised a leadership shakeup, but slightly differed on perspectives on what the new leadership should do. Socialist Tide advocated for more consideration of moving into electoral work, largely due to the then upcoming Bernie Sanders 2020 presidential campaign. Independence and Struggle wanted to bring a renewed focus on activism and politics, less on education and theory. By February, the convention convened and elected a new steering committee. Most of the new committee were members of the Independence and Struggle or Socialist Tide factions. A few steering committee majority members won, including Mass and Geyer. Ahmed Shawki and Sharon Smith did not win re-election for the first time since 1983. In fact, none of the minority faction won any seats. Smith later said that they deliberately did not seek re-election to avoid a split in the organization. Among the SC members was a man by the name of Joe Richard. He was part of Independence and Struggle, but his ascension caught the eye of an ex-member of the disciplinary committee. Content warning: sexual assault. This former member, informally referred to as FM in internal ISO documents, claimed she was part of a group that had convicted Richard of committing an alleged rape in 2013, a rape allegation that the 2013 steering committee covered up, as she alleged in a letter to the new ISO leadership on March 11, 2019. The letter had given aliases to all parties involved, but later documents confirmed their identities. Sharon Smith was referred to as the supervisor. Richard was Comrade R. Finally, steering committee member Nicole Colson, who is steering's representative in the case, was simply referred to as the rep. Based upon FM's testimony and Richard's own, the alleged incident occurred in Madison, Wisconsin, shortly after a St. Patrick's Day event involving his ex-girlfriend. The two were at a party where the woman claimed that she was raped by Richard. Richard vehemently denied this. The situation was brought forth to a recently formed National Disciplinary Committee. The NDC was formed in response to the cover-up by the SWP UK to better handle cases such as this one. FM was shocked to have been called in so soon. They were advised to keep the proceedings secret, which she agreed with at the time to preserve group cohesion while things were being sorted out. The group was tasked with investigating the incident over 3 months, which involved conducting interviews and reviewing statements from all parties involved.
I took my position as investigator very seriously. I devoured research on the history of false accusations, how PTSD affects testimony, proper investigation procedures, everything I could get my hands on. When I told Sharon Smith and Nicole Colson that I was doing research, neither seemed to care. Both were consumed with cobbling together some kind of guidelines for a case that had already begun. Sharon reassured me that they had faith in our good judgment, as if moral character rather than political perspective and training were required for a successful resolution. Colson was curt and argumentative from the beginning. I always chose to talk directly to Sharon Smith.
However, her rapport with Smith quickly faded, and FM alleges that her behavior gradually became more and more strange.
I believe at first, Sharon Smith did their best not to sway me or give their opinion. However, right before the investigation began, on a private telephone call, Sharon Smith casually said to me, "I don't think he raped her. I think he was just a brute." Sharon Smith sounded like someone scolding a naughty child. I told him, "You're a brute. You should be ashamed of yourself." This, of course, gave me immense pause.
Seriously?
What did it mean for a man to be a brute towards a woman accusing him of rape? To be a brute implies cruelty and non-consent. I should have realized that Sharon Smith and I were operating from a different understanding of what rape is. My definition of rape is using someone's body sexually without their consent, something a brute might do. Sharon Smith seemed to think more was required, that rape was always some sort of monstrous, sadistic act requiring malicious intent. In other words, it seemed that Sharon Smith imagined rape as something extraordinary, rare, and extreme. Therefore, a man would know whether or not he raped someone, for example, while in a drunken blackout, because he knows what kind of person he is, and any disagreement with his self-assessment would be an affront to his character.
Smith would soon provide FM and the Discipline Committee guidelines. FM describes them as a cobbled-together mess consisting of Title IX procedures from a university website and was then told that they were just a first draft. FM had a rather colorful description of them.
The guidelines had no Marxist basis whatsoever. They were put together using elements of bourgeoisie law that even liberal feminists take issue with. What's more, the guidelines they wrote were vague and the language was abstract. Legal language was used, but neither Smith nor Nicole Colson had any background in law, so they used the terms in ways that were equivocal and contradictory.
FM says the guidelines were confusing, such as switching between if Richard had violated the ISO Code of Conduct or to determine if the alleged rape actually occurred. It ended up being the latter. They had to determine if Richard was guilty on a preponderance of the evidence, which is a less stringent version of the beyond a reasonable doubt standard common in U.S. criminal law. Preponderance of the evidence is usually used in civil cases. Anyway, FM continued to find this absurd, stating,
"Preponderance of evidence simply means, does the evidence suggest that the event is more likely to have happened than not? In a non-stranger rape case, this criterion causes two immediate problems. First, given the low number of false accusations, from the outset, it was more likely to have happened than not. Secondly, if rape means non-consensual sex, and if the accused agrees that sex occurred, what could possibly count as evidence to prove or disprove consent, especially the higher criterion of ongoing enthusiastic consent?"
With this mess of a procedure at hand, FM and the committee flew to a hotel where a bizarre trial was held on a small couch in a one-bedroom hotel suite. The ISO didn't have enough money for a conference room. Mind you, as FM describes in excruciating detail, it is clear in both her testimony that, in her opinion, Richard had committed a rape. It didn't need to get to this level, yet it did. The proceedings consisted of a bizarre cavalcade of witnesses in defense of Richard. The complainant, as the survivor is called, did not attend. Smith made a big deal out of this fact.
Throughout the history of the organization, Sharon Smith had been handling the organization's sexual assault cases. Smith did this largely based on their own behavioral assessment of individuals. If the supervisor thought you were a decent person and you insisted that you were innocent, then she believed you. If you left the ISO, or you said you were innocent but abandoned the process, then your behavior was suspect, and Sharon Smith believed the victim. Minimizing chaos in the branches seemed highest on her priority list.
The proceedings started with a number of witnesses, some of whom were Richard's friends. They were referred to by numbers. FM describes them as follows.
Witness 1 said that Comrade Richard was teasing Witness 2 by chasing her and showing her bruises on his chest. Hickeys, they clarified, from the complainant. The other investigator and I were a little taken aback by the comrade showing off trophies of his sexual escapades, but ultimately this evidence couldn't count for the presence or absence of ongoing sexual consent. Witness 2, who had read the complainant's testimony, had absolute contempt for her. When we asked why Witness 2 went into a long explanation about how the complainant gave away spoilers on the TV show Game of Thrones at the party, Witness 3 told both Comrade Richard and the NDC that the complainant was a known false accuser. We asked her for evidence of previous false allegations. Letters, text messages, emails, social media threads, people who wanted to come forward, anything. We received nothing. Witness 4 cried for nearly 2 hours. At one point he said, "If Comrade R did this, then there's no hope. Comrade Richard is the ISO. He is the ISO. There's no hope. There's no hope." The other interviewer and I found this really disturbing and over the top. Witness 4 also revealed to us that there had been another alleged sexual assault within the local ISO. This other alleged rapist had moved out of town. The steering committee was unaware that the person had allegedly raped someone. Sharon Smith was familiar with him, though he wasn't cadre. When I asked if we should consider this a new case, she said, "Nah, we'll just automatically expel him."
9 witnesses in total described the night. The testimonies all mentioned Richard's drunken behavior and sexual aggression. For some reason, the committee asked if they thought that the complainant might be an FBI informant. Then they interviewed Richard, who had described himself as blackout drunk that night and admitted to being belligerent. However, he denied any sex that he had had that night was non-consensual. He also seemed to dodge the questions, asking about the trial itself as if they were finding him guilty.
Comrade Richard's testimony contradicted his interview in one important way. How could he be in a blackout, unsure of why he was belligerent, and be certain that a few minutes later he had consensual sex with someone who says he raped her? How could he be blackout drunk one moment and 15 minutes later be capable of remembering every detail of his sex life, such that he could dictate what happened, move by move, weeks after the fact? While there was no evidence that the complainant's ongoing affirmative consent or evidence of revoke of that consent, there was logical evidence that Comrade Richard's statement was likely fraudulent. This was not evidence that he committed the assault. It was only evidence that his defense was more likely than not a fabrication.
Finally, one woman referred to as Comrade X was called, and she didn't want to talk. She eventually gave a testimony at the behest of the committee. who told her that they would keep her testimony confidential to the trial. They talked to her over speakerphone and took notes as she, quote, testified.
X and Comrade Richard were friends and drinking buddies. She certainly wasn't hateful or nasty towards him. X confirmed that, at the district meeting, Comrade Richard was hung over in sunglasses, bragging about sexual escapades, but she said that this sort of casual sexism was nothing unusual for him. X confirmed she didn't know, of course, whether or not he raped someone, but that he had problems with toxic masculinity and poor behavior when drunk. She said she would put her bet on the accusation being accurate if she was forced to choose one or the other. What most concerned X, however, was the sway Comrade Richard had over others. She worried about his extraordinary ability to charm people. She said Comrade R hadn't even been in the branch a year, and yet he had a coterie of people willing to put their reputations on the line to protect him.
FM and the committee were also disturbed by X's description of branch life, which they said seemed cultish. Committee deliberated back at home over the phone and via email. Coulson is said to have tried to push a line about restorative justice. She quickly folded from that after she found out it would involve Richard admitting to rape. This would be admitting to an actual crime, or as FM put it, such an admittance would be used as evidence in the bourgeois courts. Coulson apparently kept delaying the verdict, dragging out every line of argumentation. And as they deliberated in email after email, Coulson eventually said that it might have been accidental rape. They voted, and all but Coulson decided that Richard, based upon the evidence presented, had committed rape. Mind you, this was from a socialist organization that was all volunteer. No actual criminal charge was filed against him. Eventually, the steering committee became paranoid that the feds were coming after them. Coulson then asked for audio recordings. FM didn't have them anymore. It had been months. Coulson allegedly snapped at her, stating that she could be charged with destruction of evidence. Soon, steering began to consider hiring a lawyer. FM was unsure why they sought it, but it delayed the verdict even further. The witnesses who were Richard's friends started to complain about the length of the deliberations. They began to accuse the NDC of mishandling the trial, even alleging that the committee had held witness number 4 hostage. He was the one who cried about Richard potentially being expelled. Eventually, this aggression turned into panic, with them claiming that they wanted to rescind their statements, claiming that they had been pushed to make them under duress. ISO steering then soured on the whole process and joined in attacking the committee. They started to claim that FM and her colleagues were acting like Stalin and declared that there was a need for a second trial. Richard had apparently needed to, quote, confront his accusers.
Again, this is like the most socialist thing that ever happens. First, they accuse them of being capitalists, and then they accuse them of being Stalin when they don't like the way they're running the trial. I know it's a serious topic, but we can still laugh.
Accuser. The survivor had no interest in confronting him. Smith apparently went ballistic at this news.
From then on, Smith did little more than yell incoherent directions and lob conservative hot takes at us. Where once, Smith had joked to me that Comrade Richard was not a rapist but a brute. Now, Sharon Smith yelled, "We might ruin Comrade R's future as a political organizer."
Oh, well,
Where
God
once the
forbid.
supervisor had told us to find out whether we could, now the supervisor complained we were supposed to have been looking for physical evidence. Physical evidence? Of consent? Huh? Smith was also enraged that we had used X as a character witness. Character witnesses, the supervisor said, were not allowed and had never been allowed. Meanwhile, the entirety of Comrade Richard's defense rested on perceptions of his character and denigrations of the complainant as a duplicitous, unstable woman. After the case, Comrade R and his friends maintained that we refused to examine evidence presented in his favor. Even though Smith might have considered such evidence character witnessing, the NDC would have examined it as if it had been offered. We received nothing to back up their assessment of the complainant as a scorned serial accuser. No texts, no screenshots, no emails, no interviews, no testimony.
Coulson eventually started to argue with the rest of the committee at length and started making the arguments personal. At one point, FM said to Coulson that she was worried the situation would become like the SWP UK case, which had made it into national news in Britain. Coulson was livid at this and started claiming that FM had called her the SWP. She refused to speak with the committee after this. Eventually, a verdict was provided to steering, with, again, all but Coulson agreeing some sort of sexual misconduct had occurred. The letter was signed the elected members of the NDC, which irked Smith, who was angered that they didn't consider Coulson elected. Coulson was not elected to the NDC. FM and the others who voted to affirm the misconduct hearing were elected. Coulson, while elected to the steering committee, was appointed to the NDC by steering. Smith took this as a slight, accusing FM and the rest of the committee of claiming that the steering members were all unelected. Eventually, Coulson is said to have threatened to turn over the confidential notes from the interview with Comrade X to steering if the NDC didn't declare a mistrial. FM says that she and the NDC felt cornered and decided to give in and call a mistrial. Their vote to expel Richard was rescinded. At the 2013 Socialism Conference, the NDC was treated as persona non grata. Shortly after the conference, a new committee was assembled and a second trial was held. This time, Richard was found innocent. FM said after this, she left the organization in utter disgust. Now remember, as this was going on, the San Diego case involving Chuck Stemke from the Renewal Faction chapter had just come to light. Apparently, Smith wouldn't let the NDC handle this, accidentally CCing them on an email where Coulson called the NDC idiots who would fuck up the Stemke case. In her concluding remarks, FM urged the new 2019 leadership to do better than the 2013 leadership. This letter went off like a bomb. Immediately, everyone on the 2013 steering committee was suspect. Remember, in the letter, all parties were given aliases. Everyone wanted to know who is who. Richard willingly identified himself and then resigned from leadership. As soon as the steering committee started reaching out to members of the old 2013 NDC to corroborate the letter, all of them told the 2019 steering committee it was all true. The same day, Kianga Yamada Taylor, who had served on several steering committee slates and was recently re-elected, resigned.
Dear comrades, it is with great regret and profound sadness that I submit my resignation to the ISO. When I decided to run for the SC at the convention in February, I did so with the belief that the organization was finally breaking with its isolation over the last 2 years. I was excited by the commitment to retooling, and even though it was unclear to me what the struggle organization meant, I was intrigued by the possibility of the organization reclaiming its position as a dynamic and influential leader among the developing left in the U.S. The decision of the organization to prioritize its internal reckoning has raised existential questions for me about how to participate. I certainly do not believe that these are issues that should or even could be glossed over. I just disagree about the methods necessary to overcome isolation, irrelevance, and a punitive political culture, all of which I think are connected. Comrades, I wish you all the best. I joined the ISO on March 8th, 1988. It was the best decision I've ever made.
On March 12th, Richard sent his resignation letter in, where he gave his side of events. He vehemently denied the allegations. He stated that he felt that the NDC had overstepped and that the steering committee had overriding them. He also mentioned how he had taken a hiatus when the investigation was ongoing in 2013 and didn't start being involved in activism again until he had moved to New York City.
Given the recent internal reckoning within the ISO and the drive to rid the organization of undemocratic and secretive past practices, FM's letter has made it impossible for me to remain in the leadership or actively involved. In order for the ISO and its leadership to maintain any credibility among its membership and the broader left, I understand that I have to step aside. Though I am heartbroken, I do so in the hope that the group will continue to write its course and continue to play a role within the socialist movement. I certainly understand how this will sever my relationships with any number of people inside and outside the organization, and I know that many people will rightly want to act to protect the group from perceived predators or to send a message that the ISO is a safe space for everyone. I too want the group and the rest of the left to take such accusations deadly seriously. I understand that many people will likely think differently of me, or suspect me of being a secret predator. I don't really know what to do other than continue to be who I am and try to move forward with my life. I'm available to talk about all of the above, including the ugly details, if you want to know more.
Soon, the 2019 steering committee began to suspend the membership in the ISO of the 2013 steering committee members. They then asked them to confirm what had happened. Sharon Smith, in an undated letter, denied the allegations.
Dear Redacted, why do you believe the claims of a bitter ex-member when I have not even been given the opportunity to respond? I requested that the current SC include the complaints from a group of Madison members about their experiencing violations of the NDC process in 2013, but the current SC refused to include them. My only crime was defending the right to due process, which is foundational to democracy and is a critical component of which separates our tradition from Stalinism, which vilified and punished Trotsky and his supporters in the 1920s and the 1930s. I did not take a position for or against Joe R., but only...
You assholes are literally Stalinists, okay? You're literally Stalinists. It's like calling someone a Nazi or a Jew or any of these other insults that people who are a racist or transphobe. They're using Stalinist as like the most egregious insult. I just think it's so fabulous.
Sought to defend the right to due process, which has been well established in our disciplinary procedures. I am proud of the fact, and I do not agree that I did anything wrong. I will be producing a document shortly that defends my actions. It is truly undemocratic that the current SC did not allow me to do so before they send out the document from the former member without any context.
Alan Mass fully cooperated, providing the current steering committee with his testimony of what had occurred in 2013. Throughout the letter from March 14, 2019, Mass states that he had found much of the letter to be true. He wanted to give the perspective of someone who was actually on steering. Mass states that Coulson wasn't as venomous as FM laid out in her testimony. He alleges that Coulson was manipulated by the rest of the steering committee to act a little irrationally, as at meetings, she was the most vehement about not meddling in the investigation. However, he noted that Coulson had told him in confidence that she admitted to being too sharp and too strident with the NDC members.
She believes that she couldn't endure more personal trauma, and that the circumstances are too overwhelming for her to be able to get a hearing for what she thinks about her role in this case. I won't speak for her about her agreements or disagreements with the conclusions that comrades arrive at in reading the former member's account, but will only repeat that she characteristically takes the lion's share of the responsibility for the mistakes of herself and others. I also know she disagrees with some of what I have concluded, including about her and her role specifically. As a friend, I support her, and I'm committed to making sure she gets by in a situation I find hard to comprehend and impossible to think about without feeling sick. I hope that, with time, she and I and others will be able to discuss what we agree on and where we differ, and most importantly, collaborate in the struggle to change this miserable fucking world. But she has asked me to communicate that she is resigning from the ISO, and I take this as a statement that she does not feel able to participate in any next steps for now.
According to Mass, if anyone was to blame, it was Joel Geyer, who strongly defended Richard and insisted that there be strict due process.
Joel was the most vehement in insisting on due process, which ultimately became the far outsized emphasis of the SC. He was one of the loudest in condemning the idea that there could be any fairness if the complainant chose not to submit herself to cross-examination and interrogation, and therefore even a statement couldn't be taken on its face, much less seen as the only item that could constitute a preponderance of evidence. At one point, during a break, Joel lectured me personally about my doubts on this by taking a piece of paper, writing, "Alan raped me," signing it, and saying, "There, now I'm filing charges against you." I was so furious that I had to leave the room, and the building, I think, for a time.
Geyer apparently was behind their sudden interest in legal production as well, informing the other steering members that Richard had a lawyer in his family. This in turn prompted the sudden fear of federal involvement. Mass said that no such, quote, state repression ever occurred. But ultimately, Mass stated that the 2013 committee all knew what had happened with the Madison, Wisconsin case, with the caveat that some were more complicit than others.
I did not want to shirk any responsibility for the decisions the SC came to, and I don't want to now. I had doubts and misgivings, and I argued them during some of our discussions, but at other times I was silent, and I ultimately accepted and agreed with things that I now think were grievously wrong. But I also believe more strongly now, and wish to state openly, that I think others on the SC bear a greater share of the responsibility. I think Sharon is likewise responsible for the things that are described in the former member's document, and I believe she was a source of pressure on Nicole outside SC meetings. I also hold Ahmed more responsible than others for the SC ultimately putting preservation of the reputation of the ISO ahead of finding out the truth. There will be more time in scrutinizing this case for discussing that.
On March 13th, Steering would then email the membership about the situation. A more in-depth article would then go public on Socialist Workers' website on the 15th. That same day, Geyer, who remember was also a member of the current steering committee, sent an email giving his side. In his response, he mainly defended his character, citing personal and family trauma and his Marxist credentials, mentioning his 60 years in the movement. He blamed the accusations and the charges, as he put it, from Alan Mass and the steering committee on a toxic internal culture. However, he states Alan misunderstood that Geyer wasn't defending Richard. He was defending the concept of, quote, revolutionary justice.
Alan has also accused me of functioning on the 2013 steering committee as the accused's advocate. The reason for that charge is I fought to vigorously defend, often against others, the right of the accused comrade to present a defense against accusations against him. We start, for both personal and political reasons, with our sympathy, compassion, and solidarity with the victims, the survivors, and the accusers. And then we include revolutionary justice. Anyone who is accused has the right to a defense. This is what must exist under socialism.
You know, it's
we would
funny.
never convict someone under socialism.
It's funny that they say that is specifically, because what I was just thinking in my head right there is like, in this documentary, so we know that socialists want to abolish the courts. They believe the courts are like unelected officials that can enforce capitalism against the people's will. So they do want to abolish the court system. But what do they want to replace it with? They want to replace it with more of like a civil mediation system. And so in watching this documentary, I think we're actually getting like an inside peek into how do they believe the justice system would work under socialism. Because remember, they don't believe in police, they don't believe in prisons, they don't believe in our current court system. So all of those things are going to have to be replaced. And it's kind of like how they're handling this and the complete and total epic mismanagement of this is it's like a little sneak preview into here is what they would set up to function under a socialist society, which is slightly terrifying, but it is what it is.
Without their right to defend themselves against an accuser. In the same regard, we must have the same principle internally, that no member is ever disciplined without their having had a fair opportunity to defend themselves. This is a revolutionary socialist principle, not a capitalist one.
Aha!
This is what I fought for on the 2013 steering committee. Nothing more, nothing less. I'm sorry that Alan didn't recognize it then, or tries to convict me for it now, but I will not be intimidated from fighting for the core revolutionary principles and goals I have fought vigorously for my entire life.
Geyer then took a leave of absence from the steering committee. Mass did so as well. Both were later formally suspended until the investigation concluded. Resignations began to pile in. Daily, 2 to 3 members would just suddenly quit. Ahmed Shawky, Paul D'Amato, Lance Selfa, and Sharon Smith soon resigned as well, leaving a resignation letter that Adam Turrell and Salman Separi of the Socialist Outpost blog called the laziest resignation letter in trot history.
Over the last several months, the International Socialist Organization's political tradition has been devalued. Its bonds of solidarity have been torn apart, and long-standing leaders have been slandered and vilified without being able to defend themselves. A political project which we have been part of building for decades is disintegrating into something we do not recognize. Therefore, we are resigning from the ISO. We remain committed to the politics of revolutionary socialism from below. We stand in solidarity with, and have always been, committed to the struggle against gender oppression, gender violence, and sexual violence. And we will continue to fight for a world free of exploitation and oppression. Signed, Paul D., Lance S., Sharon S., Ahmed S., Bridget B., Cindy K., Carol R., Patrick G.
On March 17th, an accusation was made against Shockey. A prominent ISO member claimed that he had groomed her into an affair, which ended badly as she had a family of her own, and Shockey, remember, was married to Sharon Smith. Eventually, the affair was broken off, and she claims he blamed her for the whole situation. The member stated that Shockey had actively harassed her after the affair, making continued membership difficult. At this point, entire branches began to split off from the organization, becoming their own independent socialist groups. On March 21st, Geyer would resign as well. He defended his position on the right of due process and called himself collateral damage of the ongoing ISO crisis.
Resignation has been forced upon me. I have been summarily suspended in absentia and slandered among the membership on the word alone of a longtime political detractor of mine, who for many years was Ahmed and Sharon's agent against me. I do not believe that given the actions that have already been taken, and in the absence of agreement on the basic democratic rights of every member and every person, there can be any impartial investigation by people who have already found me guilty. I will not be a scapegoat for people who have lost sight of what the democratic rights of members, rank and filers, as well as leaders, are in a socialist organization. These violations of workers' democracy are being committed in public in front of the broader left. Even our friends and allies are confused by a process in which the ISO is carrying out disciplinary actions based on conclusions of responsibility and guilt without charges, hearings, opportunities for self-defense, or any of the most basic rights and norms of workers' democracy.
Eventually, things began to look grim, and in one resignation letter, a member named Akua suggested that the organization just be dissolved.
Moreover, the past week's revelations and experiences, as well as my observations in the last few days, have made it clear to me that there is no way to completely end the patterns and cycle of this toxic culture on different levels that misled the organization into this crisis without ending this organization altogether. As this new reality sinks in, more and more people and branches are moving to dissolve or disaffiliate. Dozens of members are leaving. With all of the tasks needed to address this crisis, who will be left to do this work?
Finally, on March 24th, a call was made for all members, including those who had recently resigned, to participate in a vote. They discussed multiple options, such as becoming an NGO, or just becoming a group around the Socialist Worker newspaper. On the day of the vote, with just 375 remaining members participating, they, and 100 of those who had recently resigned, voted to formally dissolve the ISO. Socialist Worker's publication ended, with the website becoming a donation-funded archive. The magazine, International Socialist Review, folded, refunding the remaining subscriptions. Haymarket Books and their parent group CERSC officially distanced themselves from, quote, certain members of the CERSC board and removed them from leadership. According to CERSC's 2019 public tax records, their president was no longer Ahmed Shockey. Ahmed appears to have left his position as president in 2018, a position, remind you, that he had held since 2002, when CERSC was founded. By 2020, Smith no longer appears on their tax records. The remaining ISO steering members held a short 2-hour meeting where they discussed dissolving the remaining ISO assets, as well as paying remaining debts and obligations, including those to lesser ISO functionaries. And with a whimper, the ISO was no more.
Wow. All right, there's one more part. This is so well done. I really do appreciate that Maxine took the time to do this. The cult crumbles. All right, this is about a half an hour long. I'm going to start this, and then I'm going to run to the little socialist room. But I do want to finish this. We've come this far. We might as well finish it tonight. So let me just start this up, and then I'm going to... I'll be right back. So it's just like Evergreen State College, except it's like the downfall of one of the socialist organizations. Come on, load. Load, you can start any time. I need to pee. Come on.
Content warning.
There we go.
This series deals with the topic of sexual assault. Viewer discretion is advised.
Others may feel this is all so predictable to be not worth stating, as Trotskyite groups are, by their very nature, nuts. So you might as well write an account of the mafia, gasping, "You'll never guess what, they turned out quite violent." But they're not all crazy, and that's more chilling than if they were. My own initial instincts were that they can't really be doing this. These people I used to know and drink with and laughed with and did fundraising benefits all over the bloody place for. Now many of those I knew from those times are publicly backing this peculiar behavior. Yet the people behaving in this irrational way did start out rational. Rather than admit to telling small lies, they decided to protect them by telling bigger and more ridiculous lies. And once that happens, internal democracy is under threat. Contest the distortions, and you have to be denounced as an enemy. Or maybe it came from such a determination to defend socialist ideas against all orthodox thinking that they became impervious to any criticism at all. They became so defensive that any suggestion of doing things differently was met with the phrase that this would betray the tradition. Even the internet was treated with heavy suspicion, with blogs and websites set up or contributed to by members, frowned upon or banned. The organization which, whatever its faults, had once been a cauldron of exuberance, debate, and enthusiasm, was edging towards becoming a cult. And that's the most alarming aspect of this story, that cults aren't circles of people who took too much acid and danced naked in the woods. They're people who took one small decision to forego independence of thought for the defense of their group. And once they started, couldn't stop. Mark Steele, 2013.
In the following months after the vote, many former members of the now-defunct International Socialist Organization went silent. Some blogged about the demise of an organization they may have dedicated most of their adult lives to. Members of other organizations, or ex-members, also weighed in. The 2019 Socialism Conference even had a panel where 3 people discussed the ISO crisis.
The ISO voted to disband itself right after the height of heights, right? Great excitement at the, I thought, really quite historic in terms of the left election of a new leadership in the organization that represented a younger layer of leaders. It represented a layer of leaders that was more people of color, more women, more queer people, more trans people, and people with better politics. So, and you know, if you had asked me 15 years ago if the leadership of the ISO would ever change, ever, I would have laughed in your face. I would have. And so I was very excited by that. And then, of course, sort of riding along with you guys, very, very distressed to find all the subsequent cover-up, all the subsequent damage, selfishness, egotism.
Seriously? That's Kay Doyle Griffith? That's Kay Doyle Griffith. Holy shit. Okay, so this is a little bit of an OG trivia point from Socialism Saturday. Kay Doyle Griffith was in the episode of the first ever Socialism Saturday in which we covered the book Transgender Marxism live from the Socialism 2022 conference. Kay Doyle Griffith in that episode of Socialism Saturday looked like an insane person that looked like a man. It did not look anything like this more like feminine figure with woman hair in this one. We're talking like bad haircut, tank top, bad tattoos, like I mean all the typical things you think of as like a stereotypical queer anarchist socialist, like all the bad, everything bad. That was Kay Doyle Griffith. Like this is even before. Like, apparently Danielle dropped the Danielle at some point because I've never seen Danielle as part of Kay Doyle Griffith's name before. And I've tried to find other presentations with Kay Doyle Griffith, and I have not really... There's like one conference in Vermont because this person was so crazy that I was like, holy shit. But that's funny. Kay Doyle Griffith right now is in this presentation is going with he, him pronouns, but looks like a woman. And so... there's a connection to the first ever episode of Socialism Saturday for you.
All the subsequent damage, selfishness, egotism that then brought a close, right, to that chapter of excitement and hope. And I was really looking forward to it for y'all, but also for the rest of the socialist left, because we need a revolutionary left that is non-sectarian. We need a revolutionary left that can have conflict over years and develop relationships relationships and develop trust, right, and work with each other, whether we're in the same organization, whether we're in different organizations, whether we're in no organization at all. It has never been the case, and is absolutely not the case now, that there's a single organization that can do the work that's needed to be done to have a revolution, holy crap, let alone, like that big job, but all the little jobs, right, involved also in making sure that we have the tools that we need to even contemplate that task, right? And one of those tools is absolutely how we can answer this question of sexism, of chauvinism, of homophobia and transphobia, but expressed as rape inside of organizations, as sexual assault inside of organizations. I think especially that's a task that we can't do as a single group. In fact, being a single group, I think, makes that task impossibly harder.
By the end of the year, the conversation died down and most of the blogosphere moved on to the next topic of the week. A Twitter account called ISO Leaks publicly released the documents from the 2019 debacle, adding commentary to some of them. One thing that they highlighted was Joel Geyer's frequent donations to CERSC, which sometimes were as much as $10,000 in a given year. They also found that Joe Richard and several others assisted Geyer in digitizing all of the newspapers of the ISO's predecessor, the International Socialists. This was all from a Facebook post that they had found that was dated to November of 2013. To their admission, it is unknown if this project started before or after the investigation into Richard's conduct. They also reported Richard was fired from his job after a coworker found out about the allegations. Meanwhile, the former membership of the ISO had gone in multiple directions. Some funneled their way into existing groups such as the Marxist Center, which actually collapsed back in 2022, so not sure if I could say existing groups at that point. Some started new publications, such as Rampant Magazine or the Tempest Collective. Both hold much of the ISO's old political lines, such as opposition to working with the Democrats. Tempest members include ISO old guards, such as Brian Bean and Paul LeBlanc. There is some significant overlap between both of these publications. A few even maintained their ISO branches as independent socialist groups, doing much of the same activity as before, but now in full autonomy. Most still recruit off of college campuses, and they, well, naturally still leech off of campus resources, such as the former Columbus ISO branch. Around the time of the 2024 Palestine protests, the group had been banned from the Ohio State University campus. Apparently, they had posted flyers with the logo of the Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine, an organization that had been designated as a terrorist group by the United States government. The group was infamous for plane hijackings in the 1970s. Anyway, moving on, these ex-ISO branches actually ended up refederating into a new organization, which apparently is called Firebrand, and it's much more militantly anti-establishment and anti-reformism than even the ISO ever was. Most ex-ISO people, however, left politics altogether, or many more of them just joined DSA. A good chunk of these people are also involved in Tempest, Rampant, or both. So there's a lot of claims going around that most of the ex-ISO people joined a caucus known as Bread and Roses. I've found a lot of Twitter posts where these claims come from, but honestly in my research, I was only able to identify a single ex-ISO member. However, I have found a few former members of Bread and Roses who are originally in the International Socialists, the group that the ISO spawned from. Many more of these faction members, however, were ex-members of a group called Solidarity, which was a different group that formed out of the International Socialists. There were, however, some minor coincidences. Bread and Roses' manifesto is called Where We Stand, and that's the same name of the ISO's. There was also an article by Joel Geyer that was republished in the caucus-affiliated newsletter The Call back in 2023. There is also one other interesting commonality. A BNR leader named Eric Blank was also published in Socialist Worker. This happened several times over a year-long period between 2017 and 2018. Blank is also mentioned in a highly critical blog post by a prominent ISO member as if he is familiar with Blank. These can all naturally just be chalked up to a lot of communists just kind of use the same language, and it is a very small movement, so take that as you will. But then there's the case of that ex-ISO member that I had just mentioned. Now, if you recall from the last section, a group of women from the Portland ISO branch accused an individual by the name of Whale E of an alleged sexual misconduct incident of some sort. Now, while finding footage for the series, I discovered a talk that had a guy by the name of Whale El Asadi He was speaking at some sort of ISO event that happened to be in Portland. Wael El-Assadi appears to have left the ISO in 2017, a bit before the misconduct allegations reached the internal ISO convention bulletin. El-Assadi became a member of DSA and then was published in the Call in 2021. It appears from other sources that this individual is still active in DSA. Are they the same person? I have no idea. Could be true, could be not. But it was just a strange coincidence, and I felt like it was worth mentioning. But really, at the end of the day, broadly speaking, Solidarity, IS, and the ISO, all of these groups, they effectively had the same politics. They just differed tactically, and there were some personal grievances. Considering many people on the left have briefly joined the ISO, and the similarity of other groups confirmed to be in the DSA faction, it's equally likely or unlikely that the faction could be considered as the ex-ISO caucus. Bread and roses is bread and roses, and I think labeling it as the ex-ISO caucus is reductive, and I don't know if I can really safely say that it is. Oh, and before anyone comes out and says, this person's from Bread and Roses, I'm gonna be honest, I was very briefly a member of DSA. It did not end well, and the faction that I was briefly a member of was a group called the Collective Power Network, or CPN. I was really only an affiliate. That caucus, just to put it bluntly, was a shit show, and I have no idea why the hell I ever even joined. Take that as you will, just laying it out there. Anyway, so there is a group in DSA, or rather used to be in DSA, that I can firmly say was the ex-ISO caucus, and that was the Tempest Collective. Their main claim to fame in DSA was their steadfast support of activism in support of Palestine. So, a few years ago, there was a really big debacle in DSA involving Jamal Bowman, a member of Congress who used to be a member of DSA. Bowman had taken a trip over to Israel, and he voted in favor of US military aid to the country. So, this whole thing was a giant internal mess. A bunch of working groups got shuffled around. This is an ISO video, not a DSA one. Not gonna get off topic too much on this here, but all you really need to know is that Tempest was really involved with that situation and really fanned the flames of that one. Since then, Tempest claims to have rolled back its participation in DSA. Recently, Tempest members have had online debates on the 2023 Gaza war, some members defending the Hamas attack on civilians. I'm not kidding. Look it up. There are also a few reader-submitted posts that are naturally denouncing them. There's also an oddly detailed account of the US soldier who set himself on fire, committing suicide in front of an Israeli embassy. Author appears to celebrate his, quote, sacrifice. Now, just as a disclaimer, I absolutely support a two-state solution. I am not a fan of what's going on in Gaza. I am not some sort of Israeli shill, but I also am just not a fan in general of a bunch of people shooting civilians. Take that as you will. Moving back to DSA, both Haymarket Books and the Socialist Conference that they sponsor have also moved towards the DSA orbit, inviting many people who are in DSA as speakers in the event. The other big ex-ISO group, Rampant, has had their contributors speak at the Socialism Conference, including Brian Bean, who gave a talk about how socialists shouldn't be for reform, but a total overthrow of the government.
That last point, I want to fix the title of this talk. Yes, we do mean actually smashing the state. I argue that this pithy little slogan is actually a core element of the project of winning socialism and essential for ending the despotic order of global racist capitalism. And so the utopian incrementalists kind of sequester the question of revolution away. It's not a relevant question now. It's not immediately on the agenda. And this is either naive in that it underestimates the eventual crucial importance of it, or dishonest, in which they actually don't think revolution is possible or desirable. That's why when I talk about revolution, I don't think of some kind of small-scale armed guerrilla-type struggle that immediately pursues a military strategy as something that's effective or is anything but suicidal in this country at this moment. The revolution will have to have a mass character, involving huge sections of society in the streets, engaging in militant action, taking over buildings, taking over workplaces, and yes, there may need to be armed defense, but its mass quality and connections to being able to shut down society and run it anew are its main tools.
Take that as you will. But more importantly than some of these minor individuals, what about the 2013 steering committee, who are accused of...
What that means is, sorry for the delay in the pause, what that means is, just to be very clear, that's one of the people who is going to be planning for a violent overthrow of the U.S. government. We've seen that guy before. We've covered him before. Doesn't surprise me he said that.
covering up a sexual assault. They scattered in many more directions in the broader membership. Nicole Coulson, a senior reporter for Socialist Worker, left the ISO after she was revealed to have been involved in the Joe Richard case as the, quote, rep. She doesn't appear to be involved in activism anymore. Marlene Martin, head of the group that campaigned to end the death penalty, also went dark. According to their Facebook page, the campaign also shuttered back in 2019. Elizabeth Schulte and Bill Roberts also have no digital presence since some 2018 Socialist Worker articles. Lee Sustar also appears to have gone dark with a personal Twitter profile and a few articles. That's all that's left to his name. Joel Geyer occasionally writes for some left-wing publications, with his most recent article being the aforementioned piece on civil rights leader Bayard Rustin being republished in The Call. Eric Reuter is a senior member of the communications team for the Chicago Teachers Union. Alan Mass is currently a member of Chicago DSA and works for the Rutgers Teachers Union's communications team. Sean Harkin moved back to his native Ireland. He is now an active member of the People Before Profit Party, a small group with several elected officials in both the Republic of Ireland and Northern Ireland. Harkin is an elected official and is a part of the Derry District Council, serving the Follasside constituency since 2019. Kianga Yamada Taylor is currently a professor in the Department of African American Studies at Princeton University. She is a contributing writer at The New Yorker, has also been published many other times, including in
100%. This person was in the was the BLM kind of like representative around the talks that took place, I think, right before and right after the election through Haymarket. 100% this person.
Jacobin, The Nation, and the LA Times. She apparently also used to write for the New York Times opinion section. Taylor has been writing many books since her time in the ISO. In 2019, her book, Race for Profit, How Banks and the Real Estate Industry Undermined Black Home Ownership, was a finalist for the Pulitzer Prize in History in 2020. In 2021, she was a MacArthur Foundation Fellow. Meanwhile, Ahmed Shawki, Sharon Smith, Lance Selfa, and Paul D'Amato all started a blog together, which is called the International Socialism Project. Most of the posts are commentary on various political issues. Late in October of 2019, Smith penned an article entitled, "Did a Rape Cover-Up Destroy the ISO?" In the post, she argued that she and the rest of the former steering committee minority were upstanding socialists and wanted to defend the due process of members when accused. Due process, she claims, she herself was denied.
I have never, and could never, cover up a rape. There are two sides to this story, and I was denied the right to tell my side by the newly elected SC. A close comrade shared the early, unredacted version of the letter by the former member who signed the letter with their personal initials at the time. As soon as I received it, I contacted Todd C. and Jen R. from the steering committee majority and the newly elected steering committee writing, quote, "I have just finished reading FM's letter. It contains many glaring omissions and inaccuracies," end quote. I requested that the steering committee circulate with FM's accusations a letter of complaint received by the steering committee in 2013 from a group of witnesses stating that the National Disciplinary Committee had violated numerous disciplinary procedures, which the steering committee had been required to investigate at the time. In the process of that investigation, we discovered the other violations of due process by NDC, which required the steering committee to intervene. This was the only motivation for my intervention into the disciplinary process in 2013.
She argued that the ouster of her and her faction was over a petty political dispute that ended up becoming much more sinister. She claims that the people who ousted the ISO minority clique wanted to make the ISO more right-wing by what she calls the cynical use of identity politics. In Smith's summation, it was these identity politics in one of its, quote, most primitive and damaging forms, known as call-out culture or privilege checking.
Besides the fact that the
why
former
isn't this pausing? So what she said is she was pissed off because they want the sinister use of identity politics. This keeps coming up over and over and over again. Where we're hearing just like, and isn't it funny because this was years ago, right? So this is not like a new piece of information. Some of the other things we've been seeing. Isn't it funny how even when these inferences take place sometimes years apart, we oftentimes find ourselves in these situations where, like, we'll start hearing the same theme over and over and over again. Like, we just happen to be looking at different documents and they all happen to be saying, yeah, we don't like identity politics. We don't like identity politics. We don't like identity politics. I just think it's funny it works out that way.
Politics in one of its, quote, most primitive and damaging forms, known as call-out culture or privilege checking.
Besides the fact that the former member offers zero evidence for these claims, they erase my lifelong commitment to women's liberation on every level. A year ago, I expelled a member who resigned from the steering committee when a serial rapist was named by survivors in an ISO branch.
Truth doesn't matter.
We expelled that former steering committee member for using his leadership status to maintain an abusive and grossly sexist climate in the branch. Does anyone wonder how I could both allegedly cover up a rape and expel a member of the steering committee for abuse? I am the same person now that I was in 2013 and 2018, with the same principles that guide my life. It is astonishing to me that comrades who have known me and other members of the 2013 steering committee for decades choose to believe the account of an anonymous ex-member when we were never given the opportunity to respond. I also received a flow of hate mail, including a physical threat by numerous ISO members since the letter was sent to the membership by the steering committee. But call-out culture holds the right of due process in contempt, preferring universal condemnation on the basis of an accusation rather than letting actual facts stand in the way.
Sharon Smith states that FM, who she alludes to as someone by the name of Holly L. from the ISO Austin branch, penned a document about the NDC procedure back in 2014. In closing, Smith lamented the death of the ISO and felt disappointed by the turn towards a more moderate socialism.
But the question remains, couldn't those who wish to join the Democratic Socialist of America have simply done so without destroying the ISO? Hopefully, when the history of the ISO is written and cooler heads prevail, the architects of this disaster will be held accountable for their role in destroying one of the largest and most viable revolutionary socialist organizations in the heart of U.S. imperialism. That accounting should include their contempt towards those who dedicated our entire adult lives to building the revolutionary socialist movement and now find our lives ruined, ironically, in the name of justice.
Meanwhile, Lance Selfa was last seen representing ISP in a talk hosted by a group called Platypus. The panel included mostly DSA members. Meanwhile, Paul D'Amato mostly publishes articles on the ISP website, his last piece being uploaded in late 2023 as of this script's writing. I haven't checked, and I'm not going to bother to check. Ahmed Shawky died in January of 2023 after years of ailing health. It appears he stepped down back in 2018 from both the leadership of CIRSC and the ISO to attend to himself. Apparently, he had been suffering from sepsis and had his right leg amputated. Several obituaries were published ranging from praise to heavy criticism of Shawky's life. Many extolled his speaking ability, vast knowledge of Marxist politics, and his commitment to the cause of socialism. But there was also a picture painted of a man who made a lot of errors in the realm of politics, his personal life, and his health. A member and former leader of the German political party Die Linke, Florian Wild, wrote how lively Shawky was, painting the picture of a passionate bear of a man.
In the 1990s, he regularly spoke at the SWP's 8,000-strong Marxism congresses at the University of London, where I also had the opportunity to hear this great speaker several times. I will never forget Ahmed's incredibly energetic, albeit somehow disheveled, and yet charming and eccentric performances, wolfing down a pizza and smoking countless cigarettes before and after giving a speech on China since Mao, delivered with sparkling eyes and a thundering voice. With him, a giant among the dwarves of the US revolutionary left has passed. While most of these organizations were crumbling, Shawky proved successful in carrying the tradition of a socialism from below and a vibrant organization into the 21st century, and bringing new generations of activists into contact with this version of Marxism.
But no one could really deny Shockey died having lost everything. His legacy, Haymarket Books, well, in my opinion, is faring far better under the new CERSC board than it did under his tenure. He was accused of both committing sexual misconduct and covering it up. The ISO, his life project, was disbanded by the majority of its remaining members, who were too ashamed to keep it going. But I guess he still had his few friends to the end. Regardless, I'm glad that this is finally done. This was a very harrowing experience, very difficult to produce, and I'm glad that it's finally complete. And I really appreciate you all watching. If you've ever joined a political cult, I just want to say this much. Everyone makes mistakes. Sometimes those mistakes are incredibly harmful to ourselves, and unfortunately sometimes harmful to others. Cults are surprisingly common, and one big thing that's helped me kind of parse through this whole experience is an author by the name of Yanya Lalich, who is also the member of a Marxist political cult. I highly recommend her work, and I do encourage you to go read some of her pieces if you've had an experience like this. Not all cults are the same. Some are more extreme. And believe it or not, the ISO is definitely one of the more benign ones. All in all, this exercise has been incredibly cathartic to me, entirely for personal reasons. And I really hope that if you come away with any lesson here, if it's too good to be true and someone promises you the world, don't join. And beware the power of groupthink. It can take you down some terrible roads that you're certainly going to regret. But to end on a little bit more of a high note, and to put it as bluntly as I can, don't join a fucking cult, because I'm sure as fuck that I did.
Wow. Okay. That was a great documentary. I mean, I think there's so much that I liked about it. So first of all, I've been saying that the far left is a cult for, I mean, literally years now. That's actually okay, so real talk, part of the reason that I decided to call my show The Cult is that we do cover the cult of the far left. Like, that was actually part of the point. And so to hear it framed so exquisitely by Maxine, and let's get everyone give Maxine a round of applause in the chat. Like, to hear it framed in that way by someone who was a part of it is actually a really kind of like validating thing. It wasn't that we didn't know it already, but it's always nice to have that validation. Again, I also think that it was kind of like really interesting to see insight into the inner dynamics of how dysfunctional the left can be, because honestly, like, okay, so obviously we knew there was infighting. We've listened to the socialist calls where the left has been shit talking each other and stuff like that. So it's not as though we didn't know the infighting existed, but it, like I said it at some point during the show, it's like it's just comforting to know that the left does to each other exactly what the right does to each other. The only difference is the left actually continues to work and be productive while they're infighting, whereas the right just fucks everything up. So I thought that was a great little experience. I hope you guys enjoyed it. I know it was a bit of a longer stream today. Now, as a reminder, I will be posting some new content to the Substack tonight, so you can head over there if you haven't signed up yet. Please definitely sign up for free email updates, because you can just sign up for free and get a lot of most of the content on the Substack is actually for free, and that way you keep in touch with me just in case James Lindsay is successful in getting me banned off of every other platform on the internet because of his fees. You can always keep in touch with me on the Substack. That's actually the best place to keep in touch with me. So make sure you're signed up there. If you appreciate the work I'm doing with these daily streams, with the articles that I'm putting up there, with the books that I'm writing, with the content that I'm making, with the breakdowns that I do, with the podcasts that I do, with the content that I cover that no one else on the internet is covering, please feel free to support my work for $8 a month, $80 a year. I am 100% grassroots funded by you guys. I have no political masters. My only job is to show up, tell you the truth, show you the receipts, provide you the information so you can look into it for yourself. And that is what I do. I follow the left, I show the receipts, and, you know, if people want to frame that as a cult, because my audience actually sees directly what the left is doing, you know, whatever. I've got the best cult on the internet. It's a little bit of a unique cult. You don't actually have to stay in the cult if you don't want to. I'm not going to force you to say or do anything, but I think I have the best fucking cult on the internet. And I love you guys, and I appreciate you allowing me to do this, because you guys are the ones that make it possible. So thank you for that. I will be back tomorrow at 5 p.m. Eastern Time. And in the meantime, let me just get my setup here. There we go. There we go. In the meantime, guys, have a great rest of your day, and we'll see you tomorrow. All right. Bye. There it is.
How are you feeling? How long have you been here? 3 months, May 17th. And what brought you here? That's difficult to answer. Eventually resulted in your being here in the hospital. That's difficult to answer.